figures and talismans. Chapter the 19th. Mystic Christian figures and talismans. Or engraving borrows from the west front of Léon Cathedral, France, a Catherine wheel window. The 12 pillars, or radii, are the signs of the zodiac and are issuant out. Of the glorified center, or beginning of all things. Figure 34. Opening rose, the sun, or King Arthur's round table, displays the crucified rose in its center. In the tables, alternating with tying knots of the Order of the Garter, which most noble order was originally dedicated, be it remembered, to the Blessed Lady, or to the Virgin Mary, the microcosmical, miniature King Arthur's round table becomes the individual female discus, or organ, waxing and waning, negative or in flower, positive or natural, alternately red and white, as the rose of the world, Rosamond, Rosamundi. And here we will adduce, as our justification for this new reading of the origin of the Order of the Garter, the very motto of the princely order itself. Or, Honi soit qui mal y pense. 66 Yoni soit qui mal y pense. Tablier phare apron. What this yoni is, and the changes meant and apotheosized through it, the discreet reader will see on a little reflection. All the world knows the chivalric origin of this most noble Order of the Garter. It arose in a princely act, rightly considered princely, when the real, delicate, inexpressibly hybrid motive and its circumstances are understood, which motive is systematically and properly concealed. Our great King Edward III picked up, with the famous words of the motto of the Order of the Garter, the Garter, or as we interpret it by adding a new construction with hidden meanings, the Garter of the beautiful and celebrated Countess of Salisbury, with whom, it is supposed, King Edward was in love. The following is from Elias Ashmole. The Order of the Garter by its motto seems to challenge inquiry and defy reproach. Everybody must know the story that refers the origin of the name to a piece of gallantry. Either the Queen or the Countess of Salisbury having been supposed to have dropped one of those very useful pieces of female attire at a dance, upon which old Camden says, with a great deal of propriety, and a most just compliment to the ladies, Hec vulgus perhibet, nex vilis en hec videtur origo, cum nobilitas sub amore jacet. The ensign of the order, in jewelry or enamel, was worn originally on the left arm. Being in the form of a bracelet to the arm, it might possibly divert the attention of the men from the reputed original. It might be dropped and resumed without confusion, and the only objection I can see to the use of such an ornament is the hazard of mistake from the double meaning of the term pericelles, which signifies not only a garter, but breeches, which our English ladies never wear. Que graci gax lambdan vocant, nostri brachas dicunt, says an ancient father of the church. The garter, to judge thus from Camden, was not a garter at all for the leg, but an occasional very important item of feminine underattire, and King Edward's knightly feeling, and the religious devout, see post, and through chapter the 30th, for particular facts very important in the authentic history of the garter. Digitized by Google, Tian of the object will be perceived upon close and delicately respectful consideration. Tian of the object will be perceived upon close and delicately respectful consideration. There is great obscurity as to the character of Abraxas, the divinity of the Gnostics. The eons, or degrees of advance in the zodiacal circle, are 30 in number to each of the 12 signs, and consequently there are 360 to the entire astronomical circle, or 365 counting for each day of the solar year. The inscription upon the Gnostic gems, Seor, is probably intended for Oiot, for the Arabs yet substitute the S for the TH in their pronunciation. In this S and the Tau standing for it lie all the mysteries of Masonry. Plus, Christos was designed for the guide of all that proceeds from God. Sophia Achamoth is the guide, according to the Gnostics, for all proceeding out of matter. St. Irenaeus, whose period is the end of the 2nd century, draws all these startling inferences from the Book of Enoch, and names Sophia as signifying the divine wisdom. The Ophite scheme seems evidently the Buddhistic Bithos, answering to the first Buddha. Sigi, Sophia, Christos, Achamoth, Ildebaoth answer to the successive 5 others. We now refer the reader to some significant figures towards the end of our volume, which will be found according to their numbers. Figure 289, the Abraxas god, invested with all the attributes of Phoebus. Green jasper, a unique type. The Egyptians call the moon the mother of the world and say it is of both sexes. The moon, in a mystic sense, is called by the Egyptians male and female. The above is a gem in the Bosanke collection. In the exerk is the address Kabak, glory unto thee. On the reverse, in a cartouche formed by a coiled asp, precisely as the Hindus write the ineffable name are the titles Ian. Apakaz. Figure 311 represents Venus standing under a canopy supported on twisted columns, arranging her hair before a mirror held up by a cupid. 2 others hover above her head, bearing up a wreath. In the field, a sigma e apinpio. the manifestation of Ariorif. Venus here stands for the personification of the Gnostic Sophia, or Achamoth, and as such is the undoubted source of our conventional representation of truth reverse, figure 312, which represents Harpocrates seated upon the lotus, springing from a double lamp, formed of two phalli united at the base. Above his head is his title, Abraxas, and over that is the name Iao. In the field are the 7 planets, the sacred animals, the scarab, ibis, asp, goat, crocodile, vulture, emblems of so many deities. The principle in the Egyptian mythology arranged by threes form a frame to the design, neatly engraved on a large bright lodestone. 66. Theory of sacramental mysticism, adapted from the speculations of the sophists or Gnostics. Blue, white, red, baptism by air or light water, natural, intermediate, 66. 66. Theory of sacramental mysticism, adapted from the speculations of the sophists or Gnostics. Blue, white, red, baptism by air or light water, natural, intermediate, bread nexus, and supernatural. Wine, spirit symbolical, but sacramenta, baptism and the supper of the Lord. From the above Kabbalistic estimate of the virtues of colors, it happens that the color blue is chosen as the color for the investiture of infants at baptism, and as the color for children's coffins. Blue or white, not white as meaning the SS in the sacred sense, but white as the synthesis of material elements or of light or of sin, lessness in irresponsibility, are children's colors at other times. There were 2 great ordeals, by water and by fire. The one is the occult trial baptism by water, in the sinister or left-handed sense, applied to those suspected of witchcraft. The other baptism is by symbolical fire. Both rites were in use among the Egyptians. The 3 ordeals of the ancient mysteries were by water, air, and fire. Thus also the Egyptian initiation, cave, cloud, fire. So too the Masonic initiations. With these meanings, royal coffins and investitures are always red, as meaning royalty active, or imperial purple, as royalty passive, or implying the Lord of Regions. According to the Kabbalistic view, Jacob's ladder, which was disclosed to him in a vision, is a metaphorical representation of the powers of alchemy operating through visible nature. The ladder was a rainbow, or a prismatic staircase, set up between earth and heaven. Jacob's dream implied a history of the whole Hermetic creation. There are only 2 original colors, red and blue, representing spirit, and matter, for orange, is red mixing with the yellow light of the sun. Yellow is the radiance of the sun itself. Green is blue and yellow, indigo is blue tinctured with red, and violet is produced by the mingling of red and blue. The sun is alchemic gold, and the moon is alchemic silver. In the operation of these 2 potent spirits, or mystic rulers of the world, it is supposed astrologically that all mundane things were produced. The following 3 pages explain the mystic analogy between colors, language, music, and the 7 angelic adverse intelligences, supposed by the Gnostics to be operative in the dissonance of creation. These represent the descending half of the Makataloth, as the Kabbalistic Jews call the zodiac united. The whole is made up from abstruse sigmas, or the application of Rosicrucianism on its hieroglyphic and representative side. Chapter the 20th. The Rosy Cross in Indian, Egyptian, Greek Roman, and medieval monuments. Fire is an element in which everything inheres, and of which it is the life. Still, according to the abstruse and unexplained ideas of the Rosicrucians, it is itself another element, in a second non-terrestrial element, or inner non-physical ethereal fire, in which the first coarse fire, so to speak, flickers, waves, brandishes, and spreads, floating now here, now there. The first is the natural material gross fire, with which we are familiar, contained in a celestial, unparticled, and surrounding medium, which is its matrix, and of which in this human body we can know nothing. In 1867, in Paris, a suggestive philosophical book was published under the title of Hébreu primitif, Formation des lettres, ou chiffres, signes du zodiaque et racines hébraïques, avec leurs dérivés dans les langues de l'Orient et de Europe, par the eternal spirit from which everything is created. The Egyptians represented it as a pure ethereal fire, the eternal spirit from which everything is created. The Egyptians represented it as a pure ethereal fire which burns forever, whose radiance is raised far above the planets and stars. In early ages, the Egyptians worshipped this highest being under the name of Hathor. He was the Lord of the universe. The Greeks transformed Hathor into Venus, who was looked upon by them in the same light as Hathor. Among the Egyptians, Hathor also signified the night. According to the Egyptians, says Jablonski, matter has always been connected with the mind. The Egyptian priests also maintained that the gods appeared to man and that spirits communicated with the human race. The souls of men are, according to the oldest Egyptian doctrine, formed of ether, and at death return again to it. The alchemists were a physical branch of the Rosicrucians. The more celebrated authors upon the art and mystery of alchemy are Hermes, Gertrude, Rosary, Theatrum Chemicum, Bibliothèque Hermétique, Chemical Cabinet, Artefius, Arnoldus de Villanova, Raymondus Lollius, Trevisan, Nicolas Flamel, Zacharias, Basilius Valentinus, Cosmopolita, and Philalethes. Refer also to the Hermetical Triumph, or the Victorious Philosopher's Stone, London, 1723. Lucas's Travels, p. 79, Count Bernard of Treviso. Two leading works, however, on the Hermetic subject are La Chiave del Gabinetto, Colonel 1681, 12 mo, by Joseph Francis Bori, an Italian, and Le Comte de Gabalis, ou Entretien sur les sciences secrètes, imprimé à Paris par Claude Barbin, 1671, 12 mo, pp. 150. This book is the work of the Abbé de Villars, or is supposed to be so. J. V. Andrea, a writer upon Hermetic subjects, was almoner to the Duke of Württemberg, and wrote early in the 17th century. The Emperor Rudolphus II greatly encouraged learned men who had made acquaintance with alchemical lore. At the supposed revival of Rosicrucianism in Paris in March 1623, the brethren were said to number 36, of whom there were 6 in Paris, 6 in Italy, 6 in Spain, 12 in Germany, 4 in Sweden, and 2 in Switzerland. In 1616, the famous English Rosicrucian, Robertus de Fluctibus, published his defense of the society, under the title Apologia Compendiaria Fraternitatem de Rosea Crus Suspicionis et Infamiae Maculis Aspersam Abluens, published in 1616 at Frankfurt. Since this time, there has been no authentic account of the Rosicrucians. We are now the first translators of Robert Flood. Amongst an innumerable multitude of images and symbolical figures with which the walls, i.e., those of the caverns of initiation at Salsette, are covered, the linga or phallus was everywhere conspicuous, often alone, sometimes united with the petal and calyx of the lotus, the point within the circle, and the intersection of 2 equilateral triangles. The linga, or pillar, or stone of memorial, in its material form, is the perpetuation of the idea of the male generative principle as the physical means, in conjunction with the yoni, or discus, of the production of all visible things. In this connection, the addition to the name of Simon Peter will be recalled as suggestive. There is a sacred stone in every temple in India. The stone, or pillar, or pillow of Jacob was sacred among the Jews. It was anointed with oil. There was a sacred stone among the Greeks at Delphi, which was also anointed with oil in the mystic ceremonies. The stone of Kaaba, or black stone at Mecca, is stated to have been there long before the time of Muhammad. It was preserved by him when he destroyed the dove and images. The obelisks at Rome were and are lingas. In the Temple of Jerusalem and in the Cathedral of Chartres, they are in vaults. They are the idea of the abstract membrum, or affluence, or means. To the initiated mind, they imply glory, not grossness. Figs, 25-26, are the crux ansata of the Egyptians. This emblem is also found in India. According to Rufinus and Sozomen, it imports the time that is to come. It is a magical symbol. Figure 27 is the imperial mound and cross sigma surmounting it. Figs, 28-29, are symbols of Venus, the deity of the Syrians and Phoenicians. They are phallic emblems. Figure 30 is the phallus proper. It is the sigma of Zeus, Mithras, Baalim, Bacchus. Figures numbered 31, Osiris. These various figures signify also Jupiter Ammon. The rectangular marks denote the Scandinavian Tuisko Thoth. Figure 35 is the Indian form of the same idea. The figure marked 36 is to be found on the breast of one of the mummies in the Museum of the London University. Figure 36, phallus and lotus. Upon a monument discovered in Thebes, Anubis is represented as St. Michael and St. George are in Christian paintings, armed in a cuirass and having in his hand a lance, with which he pierces a monster that has the head and tail of a serpent. Figure 37 is the labarum. The celebrated sign which is said to have appeared in the sky at noonday to the Emperor Constantine was in this form. Figure 38 is the monogram of the Savior. To show parallel and symbolical forms, we will add some further authorities from the Temple of Solomon at Jerusalem. Figure 39, number 1, is an evidently Corinthian foliation. It is from a pillar in the vaults of the Temple of Solomon at Jerusalem. Number 2 is evidently the crux ansata, combining the indications of lotus and lily. Here is a union of the classic, the Judaic, and Gothic forms, all presenting the same idea at once. Buddha was the sun in Taurus, Krishna was the sun in Aries. In regard to the origin of speech, of writing, and of letters, it may be remarked that the Egyptians referred the employment of a written symbol to a Thoth, the Jews to Seth or his children, the Greeks to Hermes. But Thout, in Coptic also El, in Hebrew and Egun, in Greek are all names for a pillar or post. This is the Homeric use of Gua and Eguis. Aixa is the ship, Navis, in which the germ of animated nature was saved. Thebes, or Theba, means the ark. Karnak, or Karnak, in Egypt, is reckoned to be older than the days of Moses, at least dating from 1600 to c. 66. Heraldic genealogy of the fleur de lis, or flower de luce. Apotheosis of the symbol. 4. B. 6. B. 7. Imperial B. 8. Floron. 9. Charlemagne. 10. A Babylonian gem. 11 and 12. Early French. Fleuron. Fleuron. 14. Later French. 16. Valois. 17. Henry of Navarre. 18. In England thus. 19. Bourbon. 20. Egyptian sculptures fleur de lis. Asp. Fig. 21. Finial, meaning the fleur de lis. 22. Finial. The opinion of Dupuy was that Libra was formerly the sign of the vernal equinox, and Aries of the nocturnal autumnal equinox. That is, that since the origin of the actual astronomical system, the precession of the equinoxes had carried forward by 7 signs, the primitive order of the zodiac. Now, estimating the precession at about 70 years to a degree, that is, 2001 15 years to each sign, and observing that Aries was in its 15th degree 1447 before Christ, it follows that the first degree of Libra could not have coincided with the vernal equinox more lately than 15,194 years before Christ, to which if you add 1,790 years since Christ, it appears that 16,984 years have elapsed since the origin of the zodiac. All white things express the celestial and luminous gods, all circular ones, the world, the moon, the sun, the destinies, all semicircular ones, as arches and crescents, are descriptive of the moon, and of lunar deities and meanings. The Egyptians, says Porphyry, employ every year a talisman in remembrance of the world. At the summer solstice, they mark their houses, flocks, and trees with red, supposing that on that day the whole world had been set on fire. It was also at the same period that they celebrated the Pyrrhic, or fire to dance. There are 7 planets in the solar system. These 7 planets are signified in the 7-branched candlestick of the Jewish ritual. The number is a sacred number. These 7 prophets or angels have each 12 apostles, places, stella, stalls, or regions or dominions for the exercise of their powers. These are the 12 divisions of the Great Circle, or the 12 signs of the zodiac. All this is Kabbalistic, magical, sabbatistical, and astrological. The name Ashtaroth or Astarte has been derived from Ashre, Aster, Ast, star, or starred, in the same way as the word Sephiroth comes from the Hebrew root, roth. On the black sacred stone at Mecca, there appears the figure of a human head cut, which some take to be the head of a Venus. Man's ideas, outwards from himself, must always become more dreamlike as they recede from him, more real as they approach him. Chapter the 21st. Myth of the scorpion, or the snake, in its many disguises. Ney of the Targums says that Nt, a serpent, tempted Adam, or the first man, and not P, Eve, his wife. Here we have the object of adoration of the Ophites, the female generative. Power the destroying, regenerating power among the Ophites, and indeed the Gnostics generally. The serpent was called the Megalister, or great builder of the universe. Here again we recognize, under another name, the Cyclopes, or the builders of the circular temples at Stonehenge and everywhere else. Mr. Payne Knight has repeated an observation of Stukely, that the original name of the temple at Aburi was the snake's head, and he adds, "It is remarkable that the remains of a similar circle of stones in Boeotia had the same name in the time of Pausanias." The famous oracular stone, enclosed in the seat of St. Edward's chair in Westminster Abbey, was at one time a stone to which adoration was paid. It was possessed of imagined miraculous gifts. This stone is asserted to be the same which the patriarch rested, his head upon in the plain of Luza, and is said to have been carried first to Brigantia, a city of Galicia, in Spain. From thence it was brought into Ireland by Simon Brech, the first king of the Scots, about 700 years before Christ, and from there, about 370 years after, into Scotland by King Fergese. In the year of Christ 850, it was placed at the Abbey of Scone by King Kenneth, this being the place where the Scottish kings were generally crowned in those days. In the year 1297, this Scottish wooden throne or chair, together with their crown and scepter, was brought into England by the English King Edward I and placed in Westminster Abbey.
Siquid habent veri vel chronica cana fidesve. Clauditur hec hetere nobilius ecce lapis. Ad cappa eximius japab quondam patriarcha. Quem fusut, certinus numina mirabili. Quem tulit ex scotus spoliens quasi victor honoris. Edwardus primus, Mars vilit armaponens, scotorum domiter nostra valedissimus Hector, anglorum decuus and gloria militiae.
Antiquities of Westminster Abbey, 1711. It is still supposed, in accordance with the ancient prophecies, that the stone in the coronation chair has miraculous gifts, and that the sovereignty of England depends upon it, as also that the preeminence of London is connected with the preservation of London stone. Both the ancient relic, London stone, and the coronation stone in Westminster Abbey seem of the same character. They appear to have been either worn down to their present. This magical stone carries with it the tradition that it murmurs approval at the coronation when the rightful heir assumes his or her seat on it, but that, on the contrary, it would clap with terrific noise and fire flash from it, implying protest and denunciation should an usurper attempt to counterwork or control its mysteries. It still has hooks for the chain which in former unknown times suspended it, when it was borne as a talisman of victory at the head of the army, when doubtless it was regarded as a palladium of prosperity and a divinity. Smallness in the lapse of the ages, or to have been mutilated at some unknown remote period, possibly thrown down and broken as objects of superstitious reverence, if not of direct and positive idolatry, thus very probably exciting indignation, which, as it found opportunity and scope for its exercise, was successful in their demolition. In both these stones we certainly have only fragments, perhaps of obelisks, or of Jewish Bethel pillars or stones, for all these supposed magical stones are of the same sacred family. The supposed magical stone, enclosed in the wooden block at the base of the coronation chair, has been reputed, from time immemorial, to murmur its approval or disapproval of the royal occupant, only at the moment when the sovereign was placed in the chair for investiture with the sacred pallium or with the state robes, on the occasion of the king's or the queen's coronation. In this respect, the stone is very similar in its ascribed supernatural gifts, and in this special oracular speaking power, to all sacred or magical stones, and more particularly to the famous statue of Memnon in Egypt, which is said to give forth a long, melodious tone with the first ray of sunrise, like that produced by the wind through the Aeolian harp. It is not quite clear whether this sound is expected to issue from the stone in the royal chair at Westminster when approval is intended, and the meaning of the stone is benign, or whether sounds at all are to be heard only when displeasure is to be expressed. This strange asserted power of the sacred stone at Westminster to become vocal directly allies it with other oracular stones all over the world. The prevalence everywhere, and in all time, of the existence of special stones having this miraculous gift is a striking and curious proof of the continual, invincible yearning of man for supernatural direct help and direction from powers exterior and invisible to him. He earnestly desires the possibility of personal communication with that intelligent, unseen world, which he cannot avoid thinking is close about him, surveying his doings. Man tries to overcome the assurance that this invisible, recognitive, responsive world, to betake himself to in his time of trouble, is, so far as his senses insist, so hopelessly out of reach. He languishes to think it attainable. The oracular stone at Westminster seems only a piece of some pillar or lithos, but no one will attempt to dispute that it is an object of prodigious antiquity, and that its history is very remarkable and interesting. Its place of deposit, too, the shrine of Edward the Confessor, is worthy of it, and both inspire deep reverence, nay, an awful feeling. Chapter the 22nd. Ominous character of the color white to English royalty. Beg to premise that the following fears are not our belief, but that they are reduced from old traditions, old as England. It is a very ancient idea, derived from the highest antiquity, that the color white, which considered in the mystic and occult sense is feminine in its origin, is fateful in its effects sometimes, and that, as a particular instance of its unfortunate character, it is an unlucky color for the royal house of England at all events, for the king or queen of England personally singular as the notion would appear to be. We are not aware whether this sinister effect of the ominous color white is supposed to extend to the nation generally. It is limited, we believe, to the prince or sovereign of England, and to his immediate belongings. The name John, which comes from Iona, a remote feminine root, has also been reckoned unfortunate for the king's name both in England and in France. The reason of this does not appear to be anywhere stated. The origin of the prophecy also as to the formidable character of the color white to England is unknown, but it is imagined to be at least as old as the time of Merlin. Thomas de Quincey, who takes notice of the prophecy of the White King, says of King Charles I that the foreboding of the misfortunes of this White King were supposed to have been fulfilled in his instance, because he was by accident clothed in white at his coronation, it being remembered afterwards that white was the ancient color for a victim. This in itself was sufficiently formidable as an omen. De Quincey's particular expressions are that when King Charles I came to be crowned, it was found that by some oversight all the store in London was insufficient to furnish the purple velvet necessary for the robes of the king and for the furniture of the throne. It was too late to send to Genoa for a supply, and through this accidental deficiency it happened that the king was attired in white velvet at the solemnity of his coronation, and not in red or purple robes, as consisted with the proper usage. As an earlier instance of this singular superstition, the story of that ill-fated royal white ship occurs to memory, as the vessel was called, wherein Prince William, the son of King Henry I, the heir apparent with his natural sister the Countess of Perche, and a large company of the young nobility, embarked on their return to England from Normandy. It might be supposed that the misfortunes of King Charles I, which were accepted at that time, of monarchical dismay, as the reading of this evil-boding prophecy, were enough, but there are some reasons for imagining that the effects are not, even in our day, altogether expended. The fatalities of the color white to English royalty certainly found their consummation, or seemed so to do, in the execution of King Charles I, who was brought out to suffer before his own palace of Whitehall, where, again, we find white introduced in connection with royalty and tragical events. Whitehall is the royal white palace of England. The white rose was the unfortunate rose of the contending two roses in this country. This is again a singular fact, little as it has been remarked. We will pursue this strange inquiry just a little further, and see if the lights of Rosicrucianism will not afford us a measure of help, for it is one of the doctrines of the Rosicrucians that the signatures, as they call them, of objects have a magical marking up and a preternatural effect, through hidden spiritual reasons of which we have no idea in this mortal state. In other words, that magic and charming, through talismans, is possible, common sense being not all sense. The color white is esteemed both of good and of bad augury, according to the circumstances and the periods of its presentation. However, in relation to the use of the name Albert Edward, in a possible future time, which every loyal subject will hope to be remote enough, we would advise a variation of our future king's name, and an avoidance of this supposedly unfortunate prefix Albert in favor of Edward only. This name of Edward is an historical, triumphant, and auspicious name, for all our Edwards except the weak King Edward II have been powerful or noteworthy men. Now, very few people have had occasion to remark, or have recalled the fact as significant and ominous in the way we mean, that the word Albert itself means white. The root of Albert is, in most languages, to be found in white Albus, white Alp, white Albania, the white country. We here recall the snowy camise, to which Byron makes reference as worn in Albania. Albion, Alb, Ai, El, Ale, all mean white. Examples might be multiplied. Alambda.pose, Ahme Albus, white, are derived from the Celtic Alp, and from thence came the word Alps, which are mountains always. White, as being covered with albus, white, certainly comes from the Celtic Alp, or Alb, says the historian Pezron, for in that language, as well as in many others, the 6 and the P frequently interchange, from whence the ancient Latins, and the snow. Sabines themselves said Alpus for white. I consider it therefore as certain, continues Pezron, that from Alpus the word Alps came, because the mountains are always white, as being covered with snow, the words Alp or Alb, and their compounds meaning white everywhere. I conclude also that from the pen of the Celta, Umbrians, and Sabines, which signifies a head, top, or high place, they made Penninus Mons, the Apennines, vast mountains in Italy. Thus these celebrated words proceed certainly from the Gaulish tongue, and are older by several ages than the city of Rome. The following are all Teutonic or German words, Alb, Alf, and Alp, which all signify white as their original root. Thus much for white. 66 white is also a color not auspicious to the Prussian royal family, although, again, in a contradictory way, the ensigns of Prussia are, as armorists well know, the original white and black of the Egyptians, which were adopted by the Teutons and the Templars. These white and black tinctures are heraldically argent and sable, luna or pearl, for tears, Saturn or diamond, for sadness, penance, and ashes. In these strange senses, the Rosicrucians accepted colors as in themselves talismanic, powerfully operative through their planetary efficients, or signatures, as the astrologers call them. These ideas, more or less pronounced, have prevailed in all ages, and in all countries, and they lurk largely in suspicion through our own land. We are all aware in England of the objection to the color green in certain cases. It is the spirit color, a magic color, the color of the fairies, as the Kabbalistic tutelary miniature spirits are called, who are supposed to be very jealous of its use. In Ireland, green is universally regarded with distrust, but with veneration in the spiritual sense. It is the national color, for the patroness of Ireland is the female deity, the mother of nature, known in the classic mythology as Venus. Equally, Venus the graceful and Venus the terrible as the goddess of life and of death. The various verts, or greens, are the color rulers in the emblazonry of the Emerald Isle. The presiding deity of the land of Iarna, or of Ireland, is the mythic woman, born out of the fecundity of nature or out of the great deep. This is the genius who is impaled or crucified, in its real hidden meaning upon the stalk or tree of life, indicated by the Irish harp. Her hair, in the moment of agony, streams Daphne-like, as, when about to be transformed into the tree, behind her in the wind, entwines, in the mortal, mythical stress, into the 7 strings of the magic Irish harp, whose music is the music of the spheres, or of the Rosicrucian, assumed penitential, visible world. These 7 strings stand for the 7 vowels, by means of which came speech to man, when the new being, man, opened his mouth and spake. The 7 strings of the Irish harp, it will be remembered, are blazoned Luna, or the moon, the feminine moon, according to the practice of the old heralds, in regard to all royal or ruling achievements which are blazoned by the names of the planets. The 7 strings of the Irish harp mean also the 7 pure tones in music. These, again, stand for the 7 prismatic colors, which again describe the 7 vowels, and these again represent their 7 rulers, or the 7 planets, which have their 7 spirits, or celestial flames, which are the 7 angels or spirits of God, who keep the way round about the throne of the Ancient of Days. There is in most countries an objection to Friday, although it is the Mohammedan sacred day or Sabbath. Friday is the day of the green. Emeralds, or smaragds, are proper to be worn on Friday, and bring good fortune, as exercising occult influences on this particular day. This is the day on which all green gems and the color green should be universally used. Friday is the woman's day of the 7-fold weekly period, and therefore, as some ill-natured people might say, it is the unlucky day. Certain it is, however, that although it presents the exact contradiction of being especially the woman's day, few or no marriages would be celebrated on this day, as popularly bearing the mark of ill luck, which supposition few would like openly to defy, or, according to the familiar expression, fly in the face of. May is also forbidden for marriages, although days. The Hermetic Brethren had certain rules that they observed in relation to this view of the power of precious stones to bring good or bad fortune through the planetary affinities of certain days, because they imagined that the various gems, equally as gold and silver, were produced through the chemic operation of the planets, working secretly in the telluric body. They thought that gold and silver, and all the gems, had but one foundation in nature, and were simply augmented, purified, and perfected through the operation of the hermetic or magnetic light, invisible and unattainable under ordinary circumstances, and unknown except to the alchemists. All yellow gems and gold are appropriate to be worn on Sunday, to draw down the propitious influences or to avert the antagonistic effects of the spirits on this day through its ruler and name, giver, the sun. White stones are to be worn because this is the day of the moon, or of the second power in nature. Tuesday, which is the day of Mars, claims rubies and all stones of a fiery luster. Wednesday is the day for turquoises, sapphires, and all precious stones which seem to reflect the blue of the vault of heaven, and that imply the lucent azure of the supposed spiritual atmosphere, wherein, or under which, the Rosicrucian sylphs dwell, those elementary children who, according to the Kabbalistic theogony, are always striving for intercourse with the race of Adam, seeking a share of his particular privilege of immortality, which has been denied to them. Thursday demands amethysts and deep-colored stones of sanguine tint, because Thursday is the day of Thor, the runic impersonated male divine sacrifice. Friday, which is the day of Venus, has its appropriate emeralds and reigns over all the varieties of the imperial, and yet strangely the sinister color green. Saturday, which is Saturn's day, the oldest of the gods, claims for its distinctive talisman the most splendid of all gems, or the queen of precious stones, the luster-darting diamond, which is produced from the black of Seb or Saturn, the origin of all visible things, or the great deep, or great mother, in one sense, is the woman's month, or month in which May Day occurs and in which May poles, used to be set up everywhere, but to return to the ill-omened color to England, white, and to the important shape in which we find it to appear in the name borne by our Prince of Wales, Albert Edward, inheriting his name, Albert, from perhaps the most lovable prince whom this country has ever known as casting, in his destinies, by marriage with it, but whose end, in the prime of life and in the fullness of his influence, was surely unfortunate enough, when the eyes of hope of all Europe, in various respects, were fixed upon him. Let us then suggest that the name Albert be passed over in the person of the heir to the throne as a name laid aside, and let us hope that by and by he will be known as king by the name, the propitious name, of Edward only, Edward the Seventh, a period whose oncome, because of the royal disappearance, which it will imply, we most earnestly and religiously deprecate. But the time must come, and we may be forgiven the thought sometimes obtruding, for it is of England and of her destinies we speak. Fanciful and strange as our unexpected allusions and remote legendary speculations may appear, far off the beaten tracks of this hard, common sense, mechanical, everyday world, in which the lot of thinkers, if of unusual bent, really seems most injuriously cast and even cruelly cast. But men are men, and thoughts are thoughts, whether the thoughts of the conquest or of those of the reign of Victoria, all are alike in their reality at the time that they arise in the mind. The White Lady of Berlin and her mysterious appearances from time to time are well known to the writers of modern romantic biographical story. Whom she is supposed to represent seems to be unknown to all. Those who have recorded her fitful revelations of herself venture no surmise, but she is considered in some way the evil genius of the Hohenzollern family, much in the same manner as the unaccounted for figure might have been. Regarded who revealed himself to Brutus on the plains of Philippi, and who announced the crowning misfortunes of the next day. The Irish have a name for this supernatural appearance in the banshee, or the speaker or exponent of fate. The White Lady of Berlin is supposed to be seen by some person in the palace before any preeminent disaster supervenes, occurring to a member of the royal house. The glimpses of this White Lady are only momentary and delusive, so vague indeed as to be readily contradicted or explained away even by the supposed seers themselves. It is also a fact not a little curious, when we come to consider it by the side glance, as it were, that the color white, besides being that of the White Rose and of Whitehall, is that white of the unlucky Stuarts, whose history through centuries, both in Scotland and in England, was but one long catalogue of mishaps, woes, and disasters. Prince Charles Edward and his famous White Cockade, and the evil fortunes of all his followers and of the Jacobite cause in general in 1715 and 1745, emblemed in the Virgin, holy color white, supply a touching, nay, tragical page in public and in private history. Lastly, we may adduce as a supposed exemplification of the terrible general effects of this evil-boding name albus and color white in France the history of all the Bourbons, whose color is white in particular, from the first of that name, who displayed his snowy banner, and who fell by the dagger of an assassin, to the last Bourbon in modern history, whose fate we will not attempt to forecast, nor in any manner to seem to bespeak. Merlin, whose prophecy of the dangers at some time of white to the kingdom of England was supposed to refer to the invasion of this country by the pale Saxons, whose device or token was the white horse, until further associations of white and misfortune in England came to dispel the idea, may even still have his original prophetic forecast unfulfilled. The color, white, or some strange, at present unimagined, associations of white may yet lie like a dream, perdu in the future, of the chances of which no man 1-1 can speak to justify Merlin at once and to astonish and bewilder by the long-delayed evolvement of the centuries in which, at last, the realization and the misfortune become simultaneously apparent, for which, and for the possibilities of which, we will terminate in the adjuration of the sublime Romans, those masters in the art of augury and of divination, absit omen. But thus much we have chosen to explain about the color white, in justification of the ideas of the Rosicrucians, as to the supernatural power of colors, and as to the magical qualities of those occult influences which they determined, in their philosophical vocabularies, strangely and mysteriously to call the signatures of things. Ancient crosses, Margam, South Wales, St. Patrick's, Company Louth, various foliated curves of the lotus. Chapter the 23rd, the beliefs of the Rosicrucians, meaning of lights and of commemorative flambeaux in all worship. Rom, the name of the temple, now Stonehenge, comes the name of Ambresbury, which stands a few miles from it. This is called the Ambres of the Abiri. It is 2 words and means the Ambres of the Dii Potent, or of the 7 feet 78 inches or Kabiri, for they are the same. The star of the Légion d'honneur bears the inscription, Napoleon, Empereur des Français. This order was instituted by the Emperor Napoleon I, after the discovery and dissolution of the secret society, or brotherhood, of which General Pichegru, Georges Cadoudal, the famous Moreau, and other noted revolutionary men were members. This order possessed, it is stated, a talisman, or mystic head, which served as a recognitive mark, and was supposed to be a sort of bond to the brotherhood. After their death, their secret insignia were discovered, and it has been stated that the Emperor Napoleon, whose attention was instantaneously arrested by great and unusual ideas or supernatural suggestions, in suppressing this mystic symbol or head, adopted it in another form, and substituted his own head in profile as the palladium or talisman for his new order of the Legion of Honor. The saffron robe of Hymen is of the color of the flame of fire. The bride, in ancient days, was covered with a veil called the flammeum, Unless made under this, no vow was considered sacred. The ancients swore not by the altar, but by the flame of fire which was upon the altar. Yellow, or flame color, was the color of the Gebers or Gebers, or fire worshippers. The Persian lilies are yellow, and here will be remarked a connection between this fact of the yellow of the Persian lilies and the mystic symbols in various parts of our book. Mystic rites and the symbolical lights, which mean the divinity of fire, abound at Candlemas Day, or the Feast of the Purification, in the torches borne at weddings, and in the typical flame brandishing at marriage over almost all the world, in the illuminations at feasts, in the lights on and set about the Christian altar, at the festival of the Holy Nativity, in the ceremonies at preliminary espousals, in the Baal or Baal, fires on the summits of the mountains, in the watchlights or votive sanctuary lights, in the hermitage, in the lowest valley, in the chapelle ardente, in the Romish funereal observances, with its abundance of silent, touching lights around the splendid catafalque, or twinkling, pale and ineffectual, singly at the side of the deathbed in the cottage of the peasant. Starry lights and innumerable torches at the stately funeral, or at any pompous celebration, mean the same. In short, light all over the world when applied to religious rites and to ceremonial, whether in the ancient or in the modern times, bespeaks the same origin and struggles to express the same meaning, which is Parseism, Perseism, or the worship of the deified fire, disguised in many theological or theosophic forms. It will, we trust, never be supposed that we mean, in this, real fire, but only the inexpressible something of which real fire, or rather its flower or glory, is the farthest off, because in being visible at all, it is the grossest and most inadequate image. All this strange, dreamy, ethereal view of a vital, accessible something, entirely separate from the suggestions of mere sensation, is Gnosticism, or Buddhism, in its own profoundest depth. It follows on similarly to the intoxication or suffusion with the very certainty of the presence of God, which, in the poetic sense, was said to fill the mind of even the supposed arch-atheist Spinoza. The Rosicrucians, through the revelations concerning them of their celebrated English representative Robertus de Fluctibus, or Robert Flood, declare, in accordance with the Mosaic account of creation, which, they maintain, is in no instance to be taken literally, but metaphorically, that two original principles, in the beginning, proceeded from the Divine Father. These are light and darkness, or form or idea, and matter or plasticity. Matter, downwards, becomes fivefold, as it works in its forms. According to the various operations of the first informing light, it extends foursquare according to the points of the celestial compass, with the divine creative effluence in the center. The world, spiritual and temporal, being rendered subject to the operation of the original type or idea, became in their imitation of this invisible ideal first intelligible and then endowed with reciprocal meaning outwards from themselves. This produced the being to whom or to which creation was disclosed. This is properly the Son, or second ineffable person of the Divine Trinity. Thus that which we understand as a human mind became a possibility. This second great, only intelligible world, the Rosicrucians call macrocosmos. They distribute it as into three regions or spheres, which, as they lie near to, or dilate the farthest from, the earliest opening divine brightness, they denominate the empyreum, the ethereum, and the elementary region, each filled and determinate and forceful with less and less of the first celestial fire. These regions contain innumerable invisible nations or angels of a nature appropriate to each. Through these immortal regions, light, diffusing in the emanations of the Kabbalistic Sephiroth, becomes the blackness, sediment. 1-1. Or ashes, which is the second fiery, real world. This power, or vigor, uniting with the ethereal spirit, constitutes strictly the soul of the world. It becomes the only means of the earthly intelligence, or man, knowing it. It is the angel conqueror, guide, savior born of woman, or great deep, the Gnostic Sophia, the word made flesh of St. John. The empyreum is properly the flower, or glory, of the divine latent fire. It is penetrated with miracle and holy magic. The Rosicrucian system teaches that there are three ascending hierarchies of beneficent angels divided into 9 orders. These threefold angelic hierarchies are the teraphim, the seraphim, and the cherubim. This religion, which is the religion of the Parsees, teaches that on the dark side, there are also 3 counterbalancing resultant divisions of operative intelligences, divided again into 9 spheres, or inimical regions, populated with splendidly endowed adverse angels, who boast still the relics of their lost or eclipsed or changed light. The elementary world, or lowest world, in which man and his belongings and the lower creatures are produced, is the flux, subsidence, residuum, ashes, or deposit of the ethereal fire. Man is the microcosm or indescribably small copy of the whole great world. Dilatation and compression, expansion and contraction, magnetic sympathy, gravitation to or flight from is the bond which holds all imaginable things together. The connection is intimate between the higher and the lower, because all is a perpetual aspiration or continuous descent, one long, immortal chain whose sequence is never ending, reaches by impact with that immediately above and by contact with that immediately below, from the very lowest to the very highest. So true is it that God loves to retire into his clouded throne, and thickening the darkness that encompasses his most awful majesty, he inhabits an inaccessible light, and lets none into his truths but the poor in spirit. The Rosicrucians contended that these 1. Poor in spirit meant themselves and implied their submission and abasement before God. The Rosicrucians held that all things visible and invisible having been produced by the contention of light, with darkness, the earth has denseness in its innumerable heavy concomitants downwards, and they contain less and less of the original divine light as they thicken and solidify the grosser and heavier in matter. They taught, nevertheless, that every object, however stifled or delayed in its operation, and darkened and thickened in the solid blackness at the base, yet contains a certain possible deposit or jewel of light, which light, although by natural process it may take ages to evolve, as light will tend at last by its own native, irresistible force upward, can be liberated, that dead matter will yield the spirit in a space more or less expeditious by the art of the alchemist. There are worlds within worlds, we, human organisms, only living in a deceiving or Buddhistic, dreamlike phase of the grand panorama. Unseen and unsuspected, there is an inner magnetism, or divine aura, or ethereal spirit, or possible eager fire, shut and confined, as in a prison, in the body, or in all sensible solid objects, which have more or less of spiritually sensitive life as they can more successfully free themselves from this ponderable material obstruction. Thus, all minerals in this spark of light have the rudimentary possibility of plants and growing organisms. Thus, all plants have rudimentary sensitives, which might enable them to perfect and transmute into locomotive new creatures, lesser or higher in their grade, or nobler or meaner in their functions. Thus all plants and all vegetation might pass off into more distinguished highways, as it were, of independent, completer advance, allowing their original spark of light to expand and thrill with higher and more vivid force, and to urge forward with more abounding, informed purpose, all wrought by planetary influence, directed by the unseen spirits of the great original architect, building his microcosmos of a world from the plans and powers evoked in the macrocosm, or heaven of first forms, which, in their multitude and magnificence, are as changeable shadows cast off from the central immortal first light, whose rays dart from the center to the extremest point of the universal circumference. It is with terrestrial fire that the alchemist breaks or sunders the material darkness or atomic thickness, all visible nature yielding to his furnaces, whose scattering heat breaks all doors of this world's kind. It is with immaterial fire that the Rosicrucian loosens contraction and error, and conquers the false knowledge and the deceiving senses which bind the human soul as in its prison. On this side of his powers, on this dark side of his character, the alchemist works in invisible light and is a magician. He lays the bridge between the world possible and the world impossible, and across this bridge, in his immortal heroism and newness, he leads the votary out of his dream of life into his dream of temporary death, or into extinction of the senses and of the powers of the senses, which world's blindness is the only true and veritable life, the envelope of flesh falling metaphorically off the now liberated glorious entity, taken up in charms by the invisible fire into rhapsody, which is as the gate of heaven. Then now a few words as to the theory of alchemy. Alchemists boasted of the power, after the elimination and dispersion of the ultimate elements of bodies by fire, to recover them back out of that exterior unknown world surrounding this world, which world men reason against as if it had no existence, when it has real existence. It is this other world, just off this, real world, into which the Rosicrucians say they can enter, and bring back as proofs that they have been there, the old things, metamorphosed into new things. This act is transmutation. This product is magic gold, or fairy gold, condensed as real gold. This growing gold, or self-generating and multiplying gold, is obtained by invisible transmutation in another world out of this world, immaterial to us creatures of limited faculties, but material enough farther on the heavenly side, or on the side opposite to our human side. In other words, the Rosicrucians claimed not to be bound by the limits of the present world, but to be able to pass into this next world, and to be able to work in it, and to come back safe out of it, bringing their trophies with them, which were gold obtained out of this master circle, or outside elementary circle, different from ordinary life, though enclosing it, and the elixir vitae, or the means of the renewal or the perpetuation of human life through this universal immortal medicine, or magisterium, which, being a portion of the light outside, or magic, or breath of the spirits, fleeing from man, and only to be one in the audacity of God, aided alchemic exploration, was independent of those mastered natural elements or nutritions necessary to ordinary common life. The daily necessary food which is taken for the sustenance of the body was, as the Rosicrucians contended, the means of dissolution, or death daily passing through, and the real cause of the destruction of the body, by the slowest of all processes, but yet, in installments, the effectual one. They asserted that man dies daily in his own native bodily corruptions. These singular philosophers ventured the assertion that God did not, in the beginning, intend that man's life should be terminated by diseases, nor that he should be made subject to accidental, violent means of end. In the abstract sense, and apart from our knowledge of man as man, the Rosicrucians contended that diseases are not necessarily incidental to the body, and that death may be said to have become an imported accident into the scheme of things, our ideas being erroneous as to the original design in regard of us. Man was to have lived as the angels, of an impregnable, impassible vitality, taking his respiration not by short snatches, as it were, but as out of the great cup of the centuries. He was to be the spectator of nature, not nature his spectator. The real objects of the adepts were, in truth, to remain no longer slaves to those things supposed to be necessities, but, by the assistance of heaven, to remove back to heaven's original intention, to rise superior to the consequences of the original curse, and to tread underfoot in vindicating the purpose of God, that mortal, sexual, distinctive degradation entailing dissolution, heired from Adam, or from the first transgressor. That poverty and celibacy must be the obligations of the true brothers of the RC will at once be seen from the above reasons, however wild and mistaken, barely even comprehensible. This is the real original reason for the monastic state edifying and denying nature. Of the original curse was entailed upon mankind by eating the fruit, of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. What that tree was, and what are its votive idolatrous symbols in the old world and in the new, we think we have abundantly shown, at least in the occult shadowy idea. Why, supposing that the alchemists ever possessed the power of universal gold-making, they fail of producing any, or of offering one of their rich gifts to the world, is at once answered in these two conclusive, obvious facts. Firstly, that if this power of gold-making, or of transmutation, were a recognized possibility, like any other art allowed or authorized, it would inevitably become penal or impossible in order to preserve the existing value of gold, the richest metal, and the professor of the art would be at once put out of sight. Secondly, if supposed to be true, and no fable, like any ordinary art or science, the man who had arrived at such a stupendous secret would be sacrificed or martyred in the insatiate haste of the people to compel him to produce gold, in order to satisfy them. That gold, moreover, which will destroy, but can never satisfy. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. These things the alchemists too well know, and therefore they hide, as they have always hidden, and deny, as they have always denied, being desirous of stealing through the world unknown, and of serving God alone, whose inaccessible great glory, as we see, has been imitated in the golden lights of the inexpressibly grand, apostate constructions of the magnificent Mammon, lord of the treasures of this world, for which men offer themselves willing victims even to him, king of the visible, whose semblance is that of the most brilliant yellow element, fire, or golden flame, the flower of the fire. The alchemists maintain that the metals are produced in the secret operations of the planets that grow them daily in the bowels of the earth, that the sun and moon, red and white, fire and water, light and darkness, male and female, night and day, are active in the generation of the precious metals, of which gold is due wholly to the invisible operation of the sun and moon, and silver is referable to the whitening or bleaching lucidity of the moon, that gold is produced quicker or slower according to the faster or slower operations of nature, that it vivifies and vegetates, bears bright seed and multiplies, germinating as fructifying in the matrix, or the laboratories of the earth, that gold is produced with infinite pains, as it were, by these chemic operations of nature, very slowly under certain circumstances, but very rapidly under other, more favorable, more powerful conditions, that it is possible for the adept to act as the midwife of nature, and to assist in her deliverance, and in the birth of gold, in these occult senses, that the work of nature being thus expedited by this alchemical art, the hitherto thwarted intention of providence is effected in the predetermined liberation of the divine gold, lux, or light, which is again united to its radix, or producing point, in heaven. A spark of the original light is supposed by the Rosicrucians to remain deep down in the interior of every atom. The Rosicrucian Kabbalah teaches that the three great worlds above Empyreum, Aetherium, and the elementary region have their copies in the 3 points of the body of man, that his head answers to the first, his breast or heart to the second, and his ventral region to the third. In the head rests the intellect, or the magnetism of the assenting judgment, which is a phenomenon. In his heart is the conscience, or the emotional faculty, or the savior, and in the umbilical center reside the animal faculties, or the sensitives. Nutrition is destruction in the occult sense, and dissolution is rescue in the occult sense, because the entity or visible man is constructed in the elements, and is as equally ashes or condemned matter as they are, and because the fire that feeds the body is in itself that which destroys it. Man lives upon the lees of nature, or upon the gross purgations of the celestial fire, which is urging itself clear through the operation of the divine rescuing spirit in it. It follows that, metaphysically, all the wonderful shows of life are phantasmata only, and their splendors false and a show only. But as these shows are the medium and the instruments of life, without which intelligence would be impossible, this celestial second fire has been deified in the acknowledgments of the first inhabitants of the world, who raised pillars and stones in its honor as the first idol. Thus man bears in his own body the picture of the triune. Reason is the head, feeling is the breast, and the mechanical means of both feeling and reasoning, or the means of his being man, is the epigastric center, from which the two first spring as emanations, and with which the two first form ultimately but one. The invisible magnetic geometrical bases or latitudes of these three vital points, whose consent or coincidence or identity forms the microcosm, which is a copy of the same form in heaven, answer magically to their stellar originals. This is astrological ruling, by pyramidal culmination, and by trilinear descent or efflux, to an intersecting point in the latitudes of the heavens and in the man's body, at which upper and lower, or heaven and earth, interchange, and man is therefore said to be made in the image of the archetype, who has descended to man, who has ascended to him. This is the hinge point of the natural and the supernatural, upon which the two wings of the worlds, real and unreal, revolve. The starry heavens, through whose astrological cross-work complications all these infinite effects are produced, and on whose floor of lights or cope or dome of signs or letters all the past, present, and future has been written by the finger of God, can be read by the competent as fate. Natural and supernatural, though one is only the reversed side of the other, as darkness is only the reversed side of light, and light is only the reversed side of darkness, are mistaken by man for opposites, although they are the same. Man living in this state in darkness, although his world is light, and heaven in this state being darkness, although this state is light. Music is necessarily produced in the ceaseless operations of material nature, because nature itself is penitential and but the painful expression between two dissonant points. The Buddhist contends that all forms are but the penance of nature. Music is life, and life is music. Both are pain, although made delightful. Phenomena are not real. Thus colors to the human are negative as music addressed to the ear, the musical notes negative as colors addressed to the eye, and so on of the other senses, although they are all the same in the imagination, without the sensorium, as dreams show. And life and the world, in this view, are all. Comte Gabalis, Rosicrucian, imagination man being made in idea, and only in his own belief. This, again, is only pure Parsiism, and the whole will be rightly regarded as the most extraordinary dream of philosophy, as depth of depths beyond idea. Schubert, in his Symbolism of Dreams, has the following passages, which we have before adduced and made use of for illustration. It may be asked whether that language, which now occupies so low a place in the estimation of men, be not the actual waking language of the higher regions, while we, adds the philosopher, coming out with something very strange, awake as we fancy ourselves, may be sunk in a sleep of many thousand years, or at least in the echo of their dreams, and only intelligibly catch a few dim words of that language of God, as sleepers do scattered expressions from the loud conversation of those around them. The following is a fair view of the Rosicrucian theory concerning music. The whole world is taken as a musical instrument, that is, a chromatic sensible instrument. The common axis or pole of the world celestial is intersected, where this superior diapason or heavenly concord or chord is divided, by the spiritual sun or center of sentience. Every man has a little spark in his own bosom. Time is only protracted consciousness, because there is no world out of the mind conceiving it. Earthly music is the faintest tradition of the angelic state. It remains in the mind of man as the dream of, and the sorrow for, the lost paradise. Music is yet master of the man's emotions, and therefore of the man. Heavenly music is produced from impact upon the paths of the planets, which stand as chords or strings, by the cross-travel of the sun from note to note, as from planet to planet, and earthly music is microscopically an imitation of the same, and a relic of heaven, the faculty of recognition arising from the same supernatural musical efflux which produced the planetary bodies, in motive projection from the sun in the center, in their evolved, proportional, harmonious order. The Rosicrucians taught that the harmony of the spheres is a true thing, and not simply a poetic. Dream all nature, like a piece of music, being produced by melodious combinations of the cross. Movement of the holy light playing over the lines of the planets, light flaming as the spiritual ecliptic, or the gladius of the archangel Michael, to the extremities of the solar system. Thus are music, colors, and language allied. Of the Chaldean astrology, it may figuratively be said that although their knowledge, in its shape of the portentous stone, in this instance their grave stone, shut up the devils in the depths of the abyss, and made the sages their masters man, on account of his having fallen into the shadow and the corruptions existence, needs that mighty exterior hand to rescue him back into his native original light or rest. All the foregoing is pure Buddhism. Thinkers who have weighed well the character of those supposed infractions of natural laws which have admitted, as it were philosophically, the existence of other independent, absent, thinking spirits, communicating intelligibly in this world of ours, insist that it is impossible to suppose that the partitions between this world and the other world are so thin as that you can hear the movers in the other through. Nevertheless, thoughtful people are equally able to convict modern philosophical realists of absurdity when the former adduce the following insurmountable objection. Against them, when we tell you of a supernatural thing, say the supernaturalists to the realists, you directly have recourse to a natural thing in which to find it. This is contrary to common sense, and therefore the realistic arguer has no right to dispose in this manner of that which is supernatural, for his objections are futile and vain, and his arguments contradict themselves. Spirit and matter, when sought to be explained, are totally opposed, and hence arises the reason why there can never be any belief of impossible things, and only the conviction that such things have been in the mind, notwithstanding the insurmountable contradiction of the senses. N. A very elaborate and interesting book published in the year 1867, the title of which, at length, is the following: Life and Work at the Great Pyramid. Smith Professor, Beams Clory. Chapter the 24th, The Great Pyramid, by C. Piazzi of Practical Astronomy in the University of Edinburgh and Astronomer Royal for Scotland. Edmonston and Douglas, Edinburgh and London. 1867, the conclusions which we now supply from the author are offered as definitions, after infinite care, of this important name or word, pyramid. Pyramid is derived in this book from two Greek terms, rugos, wheat, mu argo, measure, or from Coptic roots signifying pyre, division, met, 10. However, we offer to deduce this term pyramid from quite another source. The present writer originally sought to do this in the year 1860 in a dissertation on the origin and purpose of the pyramids of Egypt. It is well known that the letters P and F are radically the same letter, and that they are interchangeable. In Professor Smith's book, Hugos is wrongly translated wheat. It signifies product or growth or elimination, in other words, and in the symbolical sense it means sun-begotten or fire-begotten. The Coptic derivation, read by a new light, is the true one. Thus we obtain another reason upon which we rely as the real interpretation of the name of the pyramid, or obelisk, or great original altar or upright, raised to the divinity working secondarily in nature. Pug is fire, Mergov is 10. The whole word means, and the entire object bearing this name means, the original 10 measures or parts of the fiery ecliptic or solar wheel, or the 10 original signs of the zodiac. Therefore the pyramids are commemorative altars raised to the divinity fire. The Ophites are said to have maintained that the serpent of Genesis was the Awios and the Savior. The Logos was divine wisdom and was the Buddha, or Buddha, of India. The brazen serpent was called Awios, or the Word. By the Chaldee Paraphrast, it is very certain that in ancient times the serpent was an object of adoration in almost all nations. The serpent worshippers seem to have placed at the head, or nearly at the head, of all things, and most intimately connected with the serpent, a certain principle which they called Sophia. This is clearly a translation of the word Buddha into Greek. It also reminds us that the old Buddhas are always under the care of the Cobra Capella. This is evidenced in all the Memnonian or Egyptian heads, and in the ASP, more or less veiled or altered, displayed as the chief symbol upon the universal sphinxes. The serpent, in one view, was the emblem of the evil principle, or destroyer, but, as we have seen before, the destroyer was the creator. Hence he had the name, among his numerous appellations, of 001, in Hebrew 118, OB, and as he was the Logos, or Linga, he was also Oi, and in Hebrew N72D query, hence Zupag, a seraph or serpent. See Jones's lexicon, and Zopos, wise. The UP and Zop are both the same root. The famous brazen serpent, called Nehustan, set up by Moses in the wilderness, is termed in the Targum a savior. It was probably a serpentine crucifix, as it is called a cross by Justin Martyr. All the foregoing is allegorical and hides deep Gnostic myths which explain serpent worship, united with the adoration paid to a perpendicular. The three most celebrated emblems carried in the Greek mysteries were the phallus, I, the egg, O, and the serpent, or otherwise the phallus, the ione or umbilicus, and the serpent. The first in each case is the emblem of the sun, or of fire, as the male or active generative power. The second denotes the passive nature, or feminine principle, or the element of water. The third symbol indicates the destroyer, the reformer, or the renewer, and thus the preserver or perpetuator, eternally renewing itself. The universality of the serpentine worship is attested by emblematic sculpture and architecture all over the world. This does not admit of denial. Its character and purpose are, however, wholly misunderstood. Not only is the worship of the serpent found everywhere, but it everywhere occupies an important station, and the farther back we go, the more universally it is found, and the more important it appears to have been considered. The destroyer or serpent of Genesis is correctly the renovator or preserver. In Genesis there is a tree of knowledge and a tree of life. Here we have the origin of the Ophites, or Oriental emblematical serpent worshippers, to account for whom, and for whose apparently absurd object of adoration, our antiquaries have been so much perplexed. They worship the Savior, the generator, under the strangest aspect in the world, but not the devil or malefic principle, in our perverse, mistaking ideas, and with the vulgar, downward, literal meanings which we apply. The mythic and mimetic art of the Gnostics is nowhere more admirably or more successfully displayed than in their hieroglyphs and pictured formula. Even in the blazonry and in the collars and badges of chivalry, we find these Ophite hints. The heathen temples and the modern ritualistic churches alike abound in unconscious, Gnostic emblems. State ceremony harbors them, they mix with the insignia of all the orders of knighthood, and they show in all the heraldic and Masonic marks, figures, and patterns, both of ancient and of modern times. The religion of the Rosicrucians is also concealed, and unconsciously carried forward, perpetuated, and ignorantly fostered, by the very persons and classes who form, contrive, and wear decorations with special mysterious marks all the world over. Every person, in unconsciously repeating certain figures, which form an unknown language, aired from the ancient times, carries into futurity, and into all parts of the world, the same carefully guarded traditions, for the knowing to recognize, to whose origin the sun, in his first revolution, may be figuratively said to be the only witness. Thus, the great inexpressible talisman is said to be born to the initiate through the ages. Proposals were published some years ago for a book entitled The Enigma of Alchemy and of Oedipus Resolved, designed to elucidate the fables, symbols, and other mythological disguises in which the Hermetic art has been enveloped and signalized in various ages, in ecclesiastical ceremonies, Masonic formula, astronomical signs, and constellations. Even in the emblazonments of chivalry, heraldic badges, and other emblems, which, without explanation, have been handed down, and which are shown to have originated in the same universal mystic school, through each particular tracing their allusion to the means and mechanism. This intended work was left in Ms. by its anonymous author, now deceased, but was never published. The unknown author of it produced also in the year 1850, in I Vol 8, VO, a book displaying extraordinary knowledge of the science of alchemy, which bore the name, A Suggestive Inquiry into the Hermetic Mystery, with a dissertation on the more celebrated of the alchemical philosophers. This book was published in London, but it is now extinct, having been bought up, for suppression, as we believe, by the author's friends after his decease, who probably did not wish him to be supposed to be mixed up in such out-of-the-way inquiries. The Vedas describe the Persian religion as having come from Upper Egypt. The mysteries celebrated within the recesses of the hypogea were precisely of that character which is called Freemasonic, or Kabiric. The signification of this latter epithet is, as to written letters, a desideratum. Selden has missed it, so have Origen and Sophocles. Strabo, too, and Montfaucon have been equally astray. Hyde was the only one who had any idea of its composition when he declared that it was a Persian word somewhat altered from Gabri or Guebri, and signifying fire worshippers. Pococca, in his India and Greece, is very sagacious and true in his arguments, but he tells only half the story of the myths in his supposed successful divestment of them of all unexplainable character, and of exterior supernatural origin. He supposes that all the mystery must necessarily disappear when he has traced, and carefully pointed out, the identity and transference of these myths from India into Egypt and into Greece, and their gradual spread westward. But he is wholly mistaken, and most other modern explainers are equally mistaken. Pocock contemplates all from the ethnic and realistic point of view. He is very learned in an accumulation of particulars, but his learning is, of the earth, earthy, by which we mean that, like the majority of modern practical philosophers, he argues from below to above, and not, in the higher way, from above to below, or from generals to particulars, or from the light of inspiration into the sagacities of darkness, as we may call unassisted world's knowledge, always vain. The Feast of Lanterns, or Dragon Feast, occurs in China at their New Year, which assimilates with that of the Jews and occurs in October at the high tides. They salute the festival with drums and music, and with explosions of crackers. During the feast, nothing is permitted to be thrown into water. Here we have the rites of Aphrodite or Venus, or the watery deity. Observed even in China, which worship, in protean forms, being also the worship of the dragon or snake, prevails in its innumerable contradictory and effective disguises over the whole world. How like are the noises and explosions of crackers, and see, to the tumult of the festivals of Dionysus or Dionysius, to the riot or rout of the Corybantes amongst the Greeks, to the outcry and wild music of the priests of the Celi, and in modern times, to the noises said to be made at initiation by the Freemasons, whose myths are claimed to be those of the whole world, whose mysteries are said to come from that first time, deep, buried in the blind, unconscious succession of the centuries. In the Royal Arch Order of the Masons, as some have said, at an initiation, the companions fire pistols, clash swords, overturn chairs, and roll cannonballs about. The long descended forms trace from the oldest tradition. The origin, indeed, of most things is only doubt or conjecture, hinted in symbols. The Egyptian deities may always be recognized by the following distinctive marks. Phtahs, Ptah, by the close-fitting robe, 4 steps, baboon, cynocephalus. Ammon, AMM, by a ram's head, double plume, vase, canopus. The sun god has a hawk's head, disc, serpent, uraeus. Thoth, or Thoit, is ibis-headed. Sochos, or Suchus, has a hawk. Hermes Trismegistus displays a winged disc. The Egyptians, however, never committed their greater knowledge to marks or figures, or to writing of any kind. Figure 313, the Gnostics have a peculiar talisman of fate. This is one of the rarest types to be met with in ancient art. In Stosch's vast collection, Winckelmann was unable to find a single indubitable example. It is of brown agate, with transverse shades, and is an Etruscan intaglio, or Gnostic gem. The Gnostics, p. 238, makes a reference to this figure. Later in our book, we give a figure of the Nupes serpent, raising himself aloft. Over, and corresponding to the raise of his crown, are the 7 vowels, the elements of his name. The usual triple SSS and bar, and the name Ixnoibik, are the reverse of this Gnostic gem. It is a beautiful intaglio on a pale plasma of the finest quality, extremely convex as it has been found on examination. In the Ophic planetary group, Michael is figured as a lion, Suriel as a bull, Raphael as a serpent, Gabriel as an eagle, Thadabaoth as a bear, Eratzelth as a dog, Uriel as an ass. Emanations are supposed to pass through the 7 planetary regions, signified by these Chaldean names, on their way to this world. It was through these 7 planetary spiritual regions, or spheres, filled with their various orders of angels, that the Gnostics mythed the Savior Jesus Christ to have passed secretly, disguising himself and his mission in order to win securely to his object. In evading recognition, in his acceptable disguises, through these already created princedoms of angels, he veiled his purpose of his voluntary sacrifice for the human race till he was safe, in his investment in humanity, for the accepted propitiation through the Virgin, for production only, not for office. 1. There was deep mystery in the Gnostic method of teaching that although the sacrifice was complete and real and perfect, the Savior did not nor could suffer bodily or be nailed really, and die upon the cross, but that he suffered in appearance only, and vicariously, the scripture being misread. The Gnostics maintain that Simon the Cyrenian, who the evangelist states bore his cross, did really bear it as the culprit and suffered upon it. As human and divine are totally different, this could not impair the efficacy of the crucifixion, for the substitution of persons was miraculous and remote from human sense. Hour, or steeple. Have asserted in an earlier part of our book that the pyramidal or triangular form which fire assumes in its ascent to heaven was, in the monolithic typology, used to signify the great genera. Tiv power, the coarse sensuality which seems inseparable from modern ideas about the worship of the pillar or upright, had no place really in the solemn ancient mind, in which ideas of religion largely and constantly mingled. We must not judge the ancients by too rigid an adherence to our own prepossessions, foolish and inveterately hardened as they continually are. The adoration paid to this image of the phallus, which has persisted as an object of worship through all the ages, in all countries, was only the acknowledgment in the ancient mind of wonder at the seemingly accidental and unlikely, but certainly most complete and effectual, means by which the continuation of the human race is secured. The Kabbalistic arguers contended that man was a phenomenon, that he did not, otherwise than in his presentment, seem intended, that there appeared nothing even in the stupendous chain of organisms that seemed specially to hint his approach, or to explain his appearance, strange as... This seems, according to likelihoods and sequence, that between the highest of the animals and the being man, there was a great gulf, and seemingly an impassable gulf, that some after reason, to speak according to the means of the comprehension of man, induced his introduction into the great design, that, in short, man originally was not intended. There is a deep mystery underlying all these ideas, which we find differently accounted for in the various theologies. We are here only speaking some of the abstruse speculations of the old philosophers, whose idea of creation, and of the nature of man and his destiny, differed most materially, if not wholly, from the acceptable ideas which they chose to inculcate, and which they wished to impress upon ordinary minds. Thus, their deeper speculations were never committed to writing, because they did not admit of interpretation in this way, and if so handed down or promulgated, they would have been sure to have been rejected and disbelieved, on account of the impossibility of their being believed. In indicating some of the strange notions propounded by the sophists, and if possible, still more remarkably by the early Christian fathers, we desire to disclaim any participation with them. Our personal belief of these theories must not be necessarily supposed from our seeming to advocate them. There is no doubt that they were very acute and profound persons who undertook the examination and reconcilement of the philosophical systems at the introduction of Christianity. The succeeding array of phallic figures will be found interesting, as tracing out to its progenitor or prototype that symbol which we call the upright. This architectural descent we shall call the genealogy of the tower or steeple. The architectural genealogy of the tower or steeple is full of suggestion, and is closely connected with the story of the phallus. The insignia on the heads of the cobras in the friezes of the Egyptian court in the Crystal Palace are colored on. The right, white; on the left, red, line and feminine ideas. These imply mascu, are figure 42, figure 43, figure 44. The accompanying figure is the winged human-headed lion. It comes from the Nineveh gallery. It may be figure 45, figure 46, pyramid, recognized as the winged bull and also as the winged lion of St. Mark. Figure 48, tower. Figure 49, Tower of Babel. The bull, eagle, man are the symbols of the evangelists, the man, or angel, standing for St. Matthew, the lion for St. Mark, the bull for St. Luke, and the eagle for St. John. In these strange, digitized by Google, figure 52, Egyptian colossus, aspects the evangelist figured in many ancient churches and on most fonts. These representative forms are also, figure 53, pyramid, said to have been the 4 cherubim of the Ark of the Hebrews. Hermetically, they signify the 4 elements, or the 4 corners or angle points of the lesser or manifested world, or the microcosm of the Kabbalists. Figure 45 represents an obelisk at Nineveh, now in the British Museum. Jacob's pillar, the sacred stone in Westminster Abbey, Bethel, and Gilgal, have a mythic alliance with the obelisk. Figure 55, colossal head. Regarding the pyramids, the following may be advanced. Murphy, the delineator of the Alhambra, considered the pointed arch to be a system founded on the principle of the pyramid. The pointed or vertical Saracenic or Gothic. Figure 56. Arch presents the form of the upper portion of the human calamda os. The Saracenic arch denotes the union of the linga and yoni. In Fig 56, we have the sun rising from between the horns of Eblis. This is a poetical superstition of the Arabians, who therefore turn to the north to pray, in contradiction to the practice of the Persians who adore the rising sun. The Arabians avert in prayer from this malefic sign of the horns, because the sun is seen rising from between them, and when disclosing from between these mythic pillars, the sun becomes a portent. Figure 57 is an Egyptian seal copied by Layard. Subject, the Egyptian god Harpocrates, seated on the mythic lotus in adoration of the Yoni, or Amen, or Hava. The druidical circles and single stones standing in solitary places are all connected with the mystic speculations of the Rosicrucians. Figure 58. Figures on the Egyptian sarcophagus in the British Museum. Figure 59. The eminences, St. Michael's Mount and Mont Saint-Michel, were dedicated by the Phoenicians to the sun god, as the Hydra or dragon slayer. These mounts in the channel are secondary Hercules pillars, similar to Calpe and Abila. Figs 60-61. The architectural genealogy of the tower or steeple displays other phases of the alterations of the upright. All towers are descendants of the biblical votive stones, and, figure 62, Stonehenge, in multiplying have changed in aspect according to the ideas of the people of the country in which they were raised. This architectural genealogy of the tower or steeple gives many varieties. The groups on P218 supply new changes in the tower. Figure 63, Druidical stone in Persia. Figure 64, Druidical circle at Darab in Arabia, or upright and furnish evidence how it passed into the Christian times and became the steeple, when thus changed and reproduced according to the architectural ideas of the builders of the different countries where the same memorial pillar was raised, it assumed in time the peculiarities of the Gothic or pointed style. The steeples of the churches, the figures of which we give on p. 218, indicate the figure 68. England, St. Michael's Mount, Mounts Bay, Cornwall. Dragon, horns or fires. British Channel, dragon mouth, figure 69. France, Normandy, Mont Saint-Michel, dragon, horns or fires. Moloch or Baal, gradual growth and expansion of the romantic or pointed architecture, which is generally called Gothic, and they prove how the upright or original phallic form was adopted and gradually mingled in Christian architecture, in reality at last becoming its dominant feature. Figure 96 represents one of the western towers of St. Figure 72, Obeliscus, figure 73, Obelisk, figure 75, two round towers, Paul's Cathedral, London, which is one of the double lithoi, placed always in front of every temple, Christian as well as heathen. It is surmounted by the figure 74, Propylon, Thebes, fir cone of Bacchus and the sculptured urns. Below it are represented as flaming with the mystic fire. The architectural genealogy of the tower or steeple in figure 97, p. 220, exemplifies a parallel of growth between all the uprights and exhibits their changes of form and proves their reproduction through the centuries, both in the East and more particularly in the western countries of Europe. In the lower portion of this fig 97, we have a further outline configuration of various towers and steeples, displaying the new character given, and the gradual variations of the tower in the first instance, and afterwards of the steeple, both being reproductions of the first idea of. Figure 77, the Qutb Minar, near Delhi, supposed to have been built circa 1220. The lithos, upright or phallus, the idol imitative of the flame of fire. The two pillars in figure 102 are monuments in Penrith churchyard. These are the familiar double runic, uprights, pillars, or spires. All the minarets and towers in the east display in the peculiar curves of their summits the influence of the same phallic idea, as an attentive examination will prove. There seems to be little or no reason to doubt that the much disputed origin of the pointed Gothic arch, or lancet-shaped arch, and the Saracenic or Moorish horseshoe arch 80 is the union and blending of the two generative figures, namely the discus or round and the upright and ver 83, 82, figure 82, Mudros of Phoenicia, figure 83, Mahodi of Elephanta, figure 84, Muider of Innismurray, figure 85, Pillar Stone, Hill of Tara, tickle or phallic shape as indicated in the diagrams on pp. 222, 223. These forms in their infinite variety are the parents of all architecture. Digitized by Google, the zodiac itself is, in certain senses, a genesis or history of creation. The 12 signs may be interpreted as the 12 acts of the divine drama. Some of the Brixworth Church, Northamptonshire, supposed circa 670. Turret at the east end of St. Peter's Church, Oxford, circa 6 end of St. Peter's Church, 12 minarets, and the number 12 occurs frequently in connection with the theology of the Muslims. 91, Fig. 89, Little Saxham Church, Suffolk, circa 1120. Figure 90, Rochester Cathedral, 1180. Figure 115a is a scale enrichment, introduced into architecture to symbolize the female deity, or virgin born of the waters. The spectator looks to the faces of the figure marked 116. Christian Towers. Figure 117 is a Masonic, mosaic, or tessellated pavement. Query, whether this pavement of black and white squares is not the origin of the ancient chess table or chessboard. The game of chess with the board upon which it is played is probably Masonic in its invention. In old representations of the Cathedral Church of Notre Dame at Paris, the symbols of the masculine divinity, such as the sun and some others, are placed over the right hand, or masculine western tower flanking the Galilee or great western porch, thus unmistakably hinting its meaning. 102, Fig. 98. Waltham, Essex, figure 99. Ancient Cross, Langherne, Cornwall. Over the corresponding left hand or female tower are placed the crescent horns of the moon and some other figure 102, memorial stones, cat ions announcing its dedication to the female deified principle. In all Christian churches, particularly in Protestant churches where they figure most conspicuously, the two tables of stone of the Mosaic dispensation are placed over the altar, side by side as a united stone, the tops of which, Fig. 103, group of minarets or towers, selected from examples in Oriental towns, are rounded. The 10 Commandments are inscribed in 2 groups of 5 each in columnar form. The 5 to the right mean the law, the 5 to the left mean the prophets. The right stone is masculine, the left stone is feminine. They correspond to the 2. Fig. 104, column of San Marco at Venice, figure 105, domes at Jerusalem, disjoined pillars of stone in the front of every cathedral and of every temple in the heathen times. The pomegranate is a badge of the Plantagenets. In its form it resembles the crescent moon. It is a symbol of the figure 106. Top of the phallus, Mosque of Ibu Tulun, Cairo. Fig. 107, small Mohammedan mosque, female influence in nature. There is here an unexpected concurrence with the crescent moon and star of the Orientals, for above the pomegranate, which is figured sometimes as the crescent moon in the heraldic insignia of the Plantagenets, the 6-pointed star appears in the hollow of the crescent, with its points in the curvilinear or serpentine. The crescent moon of Egypt and that of Persia is form. 1. The thin sickle of the new moon reclining on her back, and seemingly with the star issuant from between her horns, which is evidently an Egyptian hint coming from the old. Fig. 108, figure 110. Curves, Moorish or Saracenic horseshoe. Cathedral, Cordova, form of the arches, figure 110. Curves, Moorish or patterns of Moorish doors, figure 114. Moresque arch, Fig. 115. Alhambra, hieroglyphic times. This mysterious crescent and star is the badge of the sect of Ali among the Mohammedans, and it plays a most important part in augurial or religious. Fig. 109. Russian Cathedral, Moscow. Heraldry. The standards of Egypt, Persia, and Arabia are gules, or Mars, or the fiery color. It is the ardent, or masculine, or red color of Ali. The colors of Turkey, on the other hand, are strictly those of Muhammad, and unconsciously honor the female element in displaying the green, or the vert, or the woman's color, or Friday color, that of the Mohammedan Sabbath. This green is the vert, or Venus, of Mecca. The Turkish standard divides parti per pale the masculine red of the sect of Ali with the green of the Hagi, allotting to the former the place of honor, or the dexter side of the emblazonment. I5A, figure 111. The phallus and discus, as seen in figure 110A, united. Figure 114A. Query, Aquarius. Figure 115A. Scale enrichment. The Christian altar is divided, as a hieroglyphic, into 2 halves or sides, before which the representative priest extends his hands, standing before it with his right hand to the right, and his left hand mean. Fig. 116. 1. Rosicrucian macrocosmos. 2. Rosicrucian microcosmos. Ajakin. B. Boaz Isis. Figure 117. Ing. The prophets, to the left, the first of which signifies the masculine, and the second, the feminine, mystic celestial power. Some monograms or hieroglyphic expressions meaning the Salvator Mundi show the Roman letter I. In front, in large size, the letter H, much smaller, and behind, interlacing and combining the first 2 letters, is the single curved or cursive S, which stands for SS, the Holy Spirit, or the third person of the Trinity. The whole, in another way, is Jesus hominum salvator. Nearly all the sacred monograms, with the intention of making the letter denoting the man prominent, present the letter I large, in the heraldic language surtout, or overall. The monogram of the Savior is sometimes seen in the Ark, or Vesica 66, double lithoi, the tables of stone, figure 118. The union of and of is, consequently, plus, or the sower, cross. Piscis, which is a pointed oval figure, familiar in Gothic architecture and shaped like a boat or a shuttle, counterchanging the letters and the closing arcs, white and black, the black occupying the left or female side, according to the ideas of the Templars. The standards of these soldier monks were white and black, either oblong or forked. There are 2 columns of that heavy, severe order, however grand and impressive, which distinguishes the early Norman period of architecture in England, in regard to which, though abounding in far-off Hermetic suggestions, we have seen no notice in antiquarian quarters. These 2 columns comprise a part of the colonnade in the White Tower, or Central Tower, of the Tower of London. The capital of the first column is square, but it is rounded at the angles by a cut to the hypotrachelium, or base ring, of the capital. The tops of these cuts are formed by volutes similar to the horns of the Corinthian and Ionic capitals. The male volute is to the right and is a spiral valve, from which issues a dependent budding flower dropping seed. The valve to the left, which is a series of rings enclosing a point, is female. A twisted perpendicular, like a horn, projects from the base on this left side. The capital of the other column presents a not unusual Norman form of two truncated tables or faces rounded below and divided in the middle. These we interpret as meaning the woman and the man, side by side and left and right. These glyphs in the two capitals of the columns signify Jachin and Boaz, and stand for the first man and the first woman. The mysterious letter Tau, which is the same as the runic hammer of Thor, and which in truth is a cross, occupies the center point, or heraldically, the honor point, of the first column to the right. The master masons were celebrated in their art of concealing myths, or hinting them cautiously in the most difficult and far-off resemblances. The curious reader is referred to our illustration, Figs, 119, 120. The character of the head which the Templars were charged with having worshipped in their secret encampments or mystic lodges has been the subject of much dispute. Some say it was the head of Proserpine or of Isis or of the Mother of Nature, presented under certain strange aspects. Others assert that the figure was male and that of Dis or Charon, according to the classic nomenclature. The object was reputed to be a talisman, and it is called by some the head of Medusa, or the snake-haired visage, dropping blood which turned to snakes and transforming the beholder to stone. It was this head, or one of a similar description, which was supposed to serve as the talisman or recognitive mark of the secret fraternity, or society headed by Pichegru and others, which was suppressed by Napoleon, and the members of which were tried and condemned as aiming at revolutionary objects. Why Napoleon adopted this mysterious supposed magical head, as he is said to have done, on the suppression and destruction of this revolutionary body, to which we refer elsewhere, and why he chose to place his own head in the center place before occupied by this imagined awe-inspiring countenance, and adopted the whole as the star of his newly founded Legion of Honor, it is very difficult to say. In the East there is a tradition of this insupportable magic countenance, which the Orientals assign to a veiled prophet, similar to the mysterious personage in Lalla Rookh. Sioi Oiorteo. Chapter the 26th. Presence of the Rosicrucians in heathen and Christian architecture. Question may here arise whether two corresponding pillars or columns in the White Tower, London, do not very ingeniously conceal masonically the mythic formula of the mosaic. Genesis, male and female created he, them, and c. Refer to the following page, Figs, 119, 120. 1. Tor, or hammer of Thor, T. 2. Corinthian volutes, or ram's horns. The crescent moon and star is a Plantagenet badge. It is also the badge of the Sultan of Turkey. Also with A, figure 121. Figure 122. Egypt, Persia. Sect of Ali. Difference, it displays the insignia of Egypt. The flag of Egypt is the ensign of the sect of Ali, which is Mars, a crescent, Luna, within the horns of which is displayed an estole of the second, abandoning the vert or green of the Hadgi, or of Mecca, the site of the apotheosis of Muhammad. The Mohammedan believers of the sect of Ali rely on the masculine principle, more closely in this respect, Asimi, lading with the Jews, and therefore their distinctive heraldic and theological color is red, which is male, to the exclusion of the other Mohammedan color green, which is female. Figs, 119, 120, columns to chapel in the White Tower, London, style, early Norman, 1081, figure 119, 120, 1081. Figure Wesing Church, Norfolk, Romsey Abbey, Hants. The Hagi, or pilgrims to Mecca, wear green. The Turkish Muslimans wear red and green according to their various titles of honor and to their various ranks. Fig. 125, St. Peter's Church, Northampton. Figure 126, S. Out of the arms of the plus. The Hospital of St. Cross near Winchester abounds in the earliest Norman moldings. The architecture of St. Cross presents numerous hermetic suggestions. The identity of heathen and of Christian symbols is displayed in all our old churches in degrees more or less conclusive. Fig. 127. The 10 Commandments, or 5 Commandments, to the right masculine law. Figure 128. T omega T, tables of stone. 5 Commandments to the left, the prophets, or the gospel. Fig. 129. Figure 130. A lamp, Roma Soterrenia, Isote. The 10 fingers of the 2 hands are called, in old parlance, the 2 hands are called, in old parlance, of the 31. Devices from the tombs in the catacombs at Rome. Mandments. I will write the 10 Commandments, in thy face, was spoken in fury, in the old-fashioned days, of an intended assault. The hands explain the meaning of this. Proverbial expression, interpreted astrologically. Palmistry is called chiromancy, because Apollo, mythologically, was taught letters by Chiron, the centaur. Fig, 134, figure 135, figure 136. The devices on most Roman bronze lamps present continual Gnostic ideas. The Temple Church, London, will be found to abound, with Rosicrucian hieroglyphs and anagrammatical hints in all parts, if reference be made to it by an attentive inquirer when accustomed to these abstruse studies. Fig. 140, monogram of the Savior. These designs supply a variety of early Christian symbols or hieroglyphs drawn from Roman originals in all parts of the world. The Aeolian harp, or magic harp, gave forth real strains in the wind. These were supposed to be communications from the invisible spirits that people the air in greater or lesser number. See Figs. 141, 142. 1, 1, 1. 1. Figure 140 church. We have a representation of Bursted Church, as seen from a rising hill over a hop garden at about the distance of half a mile. Bursted is a little village about 3 miles from Maidstone, Kent, on the Ashford Road. In the chancel of Bursted Church, Robert Flood, the head of the Rosicrucians in England, lies buried. He died in 1637. Figure 155 displays the standard maypole, or authentic maypole, with all its curious additions, and we add there. The above music consists of a magical incantation to the air, or musical charms, supposed magically to be played from the frontispieces, as musical instruments, of two of the most celebrated ancient religious structures. The Kabbalists imagined that the arrangements of the stars in the sky, and particularly the accidental circumvolvent varying speed of the planets of the solar system, produced music, as men know music. The Sophists maintained that architecture, in another sense, was harmonious communication, addressed to a capable apprehension when the architecture was true to itself, and therefore of divine origin. Hence the music above. These passages were supposed to be magic charms, or invocations, addressed by day and night to the intelligent beings who filled the air invisibly. They were played from the fronts of the Parthenon, Athens, and the Pantheon, Rome, according to the ideas of the superstitious Greeks and of the Oriental Christian Church. Explanation. In the upper portion, we have the apex of the phallus, the kataphui, and the discus or round. The lower portion is the linga, lingam, or phallus, wreathed. Fig. 143. Alternate direct and crooked radii, or glories, set round sacred objects. Figs. 144, 145, collar of S's, or glories. 147, fig. 146. Egg and tongue molding, caryatic prostyle, pandrosium. Fig. Muslim 47, the crescent and star, also Plantagenet. Figure 148. Honeysuckle, Greek stele. Figure 149. Egg and tongue molding, Roman example. Also the pole of the ship Argo, otherwise the tree of knowledge. The ribbons of the maypole should be of the 7 prismatic colors. Figure 156 shows the union of the phallus and yoni, and exhibits unmistakably the destination and purpose of the familiar maypole. 150. 151. Figure 150. Ramessayan, Thebes caryatic portico. Figure 151. India origin of the Corinthian. Figure 152. India rudimental Corinthian capital, as also rudimental Christian. Fig. 153. Figure 154. Stone crosses at Sandbach in Cheshire. Each finger in figure 162 is devoted to a separate planet. Refer to the engraving of the hand. Figure 167, hook of Saturn, crook of bishops. By hook or crook, meaning by fair means or foul, is a proverbial expression continually heard. There are 2 works which will assist in throwing light upon that mystic system of the ancients, probably originating in the dreaming East, that refers the production of music to architectural forms or geometric diagrams. As columns and entablatures, or upright lines and cross lines, and mathematical arcs and diagonals, in their modifications and properties, of course, are. These books, which will help to explain the passages of music given at p. 232, Figs. 141, 142, are Hay's Natural Principles and Analogy of the Harmony of Form, and a very original and learned musical production, entitled The Analogy of the Laws of Musical Temperament to the Natural Dissonance of Creation, by M. Vernon, published in London in 1867, through A. Figure 159, Buddhist Emblem, Figure 160, Shield of David, or the Seal of Solomon. Fig. 161, Phallic Triad, Figure 163, Indian and Greek. Strange theory, the music at p. 232 of our book is taken as the expression of the geometrical fronts of the 2 great digitized by Google. Figure 164. Isis, dragon's head. Figure 165, hand in benediction. Temples, the Parthenon at Athens and the Pantheon at Rome, which are supposed to have been built with perfect. Art. We have translated these phantom Aeolian melodies played in the winds and fixed them in modern musical notation. Chapter the 27th. The Rosicrucians amidst ancient mysteries. Their traces discoverable in the orders of knighthood. He, collar of S's, is supposed always to be a part of the Order of the Garter. The coupled SS mean the Sanctus Spiritus, or Holy Spirit, or the third person. The fleurs delis, or lisses, or the lilies of the field, invariably appear in close connection with St. John, or the Sanctus. Figure 168. Collar of S's, Spiritus, and also with the Blessed Virgin Mary, in all Christian symbola or insignia. The Prince of Wales's triple plume appears to have the same mythic Egyptian and Babylonian origin, and to be substantially the same symbol as the fleur-de-lis. When arranged in threes, the fleur-de-lis represent the triple powers of nature, the producer, the means of production, and that produced. The fleur-de-lis is presented in a deep disguise in the three feathers, which is the crest of the Prince of Wales. In this form, the fleur-de-lis is intended to elude ordinary recognition. The reader will observe the hint of these significant lisses in the triple scrolls or S's coiled around the bar in the reverse of the Gnostic gem, the Chnufis serpent, elsewhere given. This amulet is a fine opalescent chalcedony, very convex on both sides. It is the figure of the Chnufis serpent rearing himself aloft in act to dart, crowned with the 7 vowels, the Kabbalistic gift to man in his fall, signifying speech. The reverse presents the triple SSS, coiled around the phallus. 169. Figs, 169, 170, 169. In figure 170, we have the Prince of Wales's feathers from the tomb of Edward the Black Prince in Canterbury Cathedral. This badge presents the idea of the fleur-de-lis Ichtien. I serve. Figure 171 represents the Egyptian triple plumes, which are the same badge as the fleur-de-lis and the Prince of Wales's feathers, meaning the Trinity. Fig, also referred to as figure 191, is a Gnostic gem. It represents the Chnufis serpent, spoken of at page 220. A famous inscription was placed above the portal of the temple at Delphi. This inscription was a single letter, namely the letter E, the name of which in Greek was E, which is the second person of the present of the indicative of the verb emu, and signifies thou art, being, as Plutarch has interpreted it, the salutation of the god by those who entered the temple. See Plutarch de Apud Delph. Lord Monboddo's Origin and Progress of Language, Vol. Year 2nd. P85 refers to this letter E, shnu fis, figure 172. The Delphic E means the number 5, or the half of the Kabbalistic zodiac, or the 5 ascending signs. This Delphic E is also the Seleucidan anchor. It was adopted by the Gnostics to indicate the Savior, and it is frequent in the talismans and amulets of the early Christi. Fig. 173. Tiens. It is one of the principal gems of the Gnostics, and is a cameo in flat relief. One of the charges against the Knights Templars was as follows, that they bound or touched the head of an idol with cords, wherewith they bound themselves about their shirts or next their skins. Processus contra Templarios Dugd, Monast, Ange, Vol. V. Mariv, 844 to 846. And C. There is something strange about these cords, cordons, ropes, belts, bands, baldricks. These are always male accessories, except the zones, sashes, or girdles, worn as the mark of virgins, which cinctures may yet draw their symbolic meaning from this same umbilicus in question. The reader will notice also the connection of these ideas and the practice in the Roman race of the Lupercal at the February Roman religious solemnities. At these it was the custom of the runners to flog bystanders, particularly women, with thongs or cords which were probably intended to be the racers' own girdles. Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Calphurnia form a group illustrative of this meaning. Thus Shakespeare, our elders say, the Baron touched in this holy chase. Shake off the sterile curse. Julius Caesar, Act. ISC 2. Is this the origin of the custom of the people pelting or flogging each other at the Italian carnivals? It seems highly probable. The carnivals occur at the same time as these Roman Lupercalia. Many early Norman moldings exhibit various examples of the cable. Thongs, ties, and network are seen to bind all the significant figures in the early English and Irish churches. Is there any connection between these bonds or ties or lacings with the cable tow of the initiates among the Masons? Perhaps the toe in this cable toe means the Tao, or stood for it originally. Reference may here be made to the snake, which forms the girdle of the Gnostic Good Shepherd in the illustration later in our book. The cable moldings in Gothic architecture are intended to carry an important meaning. They are found in the pointed or Christian architecture in continual close connection with the triplicated zigzag, the Van Dykes, or aquarii, as we designate them. Because all these architectural forms, which are hieroglyphs, mean the feminine or second principle, and express the sign of Aquarius, with its watery or lunar hints, its twin fishes, and its Jonah-like anagrams of the Redeemer. Hence the boat-like, elongated peculiar form, called the vesica piscis, which is the oblong shuttle-shaped frame continually set over doors and windows and elsewhere in Gothic churches, to contain effigies of the Savior, or Virgin Mary, or groups from the New Testament in connection with these two sacred persons. A doorway in Barfreston Church, Kent, supplies an excellent example of the employment of this oblong figure, which is also Babylonian, and means the female member as its starting point. In a previous part of our book, we give various figures of the prows or cutwater heads of gondolas, in which we clearly show the origin of their peculiar form, which represents the securus, or sacrificial axe, that crook originally expressed in the hook of Saturn. The bu centaur indicates the fabulous being, the bicorporate ox or horse and man, as will be found by a separation of the syllables bu centaur. It is the name of the state galley of the Doge of Venice, used on the occasion of his figurative stately marriage with the Adriatic or espousal of the Virgin of the Sea, who was Sibyl of the sacrificial hook. The hatchet of Dis, the glaive, the halberd, the reaping hook of Ceres, the crescent moon, the Delphic E, are all the same mystic figure. The prow of the gondola exhibits unmistakably the securus and fasces conjointly, or the axe of the sacrifice, and the rods for the scourging of the victim first, if human, and afterwards for his burning, the rods being the firewood. Lictors have their name probably from lek. From this peculiar cutwater rose the dragon beak, the prow or frau, the figurehead and fiddlehead. They have all a feminine origin. Figure 174 represents S. Johann, from an early woodcut of the 12 Apostles. His right hand is raised in the act of the holy sign, whilst his left clasps the chalice of the SS, or sacrament of wine. In the cup is a salamander, signifying the HG. This is St. John the Q Apostle, the author of the Apocalypse, or the Sanctus Spiritus, who baptizes in the mystic Eucharist with the Holy Ghost and with fire. Fig. The following are the names of the angels of the planets according to the Gnostics. At the beginning of all things is Jehovah, victory, at the end, the old serpent. Between these are the seraphim and cherubim, and their representatives. Origen calls the sun, Adonai, the moon, Io, Jupiter, Eloi, Mars, Sabao, Orion, Venus, Astaphi, Mercury, Ildebaoth, Saturn. All this is Gnostic, highest mysticism therefore. The name Tarask is given for the dragon of a northern nation. Under the Roman emperors and under the emperors of Byzantium, every cohort or centurion bore a dragon as its ensign. Matthew of Westminster, speaking of the early battles of this country of England, says, "The king's place was between the dragon and the standard, regius locus fuit inter draconem e standardum." This is the undoubted origin of the ensign's pair of colors in a battalion, viz. The first color, or king's color, whose place is to the right, is properly the standard, and the second color, or the regimental color, to which is assigned the left hand or female or sinister place, is the dragon. The dragon was supposed to conduct to victory because its figure was a most potent charm. The standards and guidons of the cavalry follow the same magic rule. The planets are supposed by the astrologers and alchemists to exercise dominion more particularly in the order following, and to produce effects upon their own appropriate undermentioned metals, on planetarily corresponding days. These are Sol for gold on Sunday, Luna for silver on Monday, Mars for iron on Tuesday, Mercury for quicksilver on Wednesday, Jupiter for tin on Thursday, Venus for copper on Friday, and Saturn for lead on Saturday. The emblematical sculptures in which the whole enigma of the art of transmutation is supposed to be contained are those over the fourth arch of the Cemetery of the Innocents, at Paris, as you go through the great gate of Saint-Denis on the right-hand side. They were placed there by Nicolas Flamel. The old traditions, from time immemorial, aver that it is neither proper for sailors nor for servants of the sea to wear beards. That they have never done so is true, except at those times when profound mythic meanings were not understood or were neglected. This smoothness of a sailor's face arises from the fact that the sea has always been mythologically feminine, and that sailors and men or followers of the sea are under the protection of the Queen of the Deep or the Virgin of the Sea. Hence the figure of Britannia, with her scepter of the sea or trident, and not that of Neptune. The Virgin Mary, the star of the sea, and patroness of sailors, rules and governs the ocean, and her colors are the ultramarine of the deep and sea green when viewed in this phase of her divine character. In all representations, ancient or modern, sailors have beardless faces, unless they belong to the reprobate and barbarian classes, such as pirates and outlaws, and men who have supposedly thrown off devotional observance and fallen into the rough recusancy of mere nature. Fig 175 is a very curious design from Sylvanus Morgan, an old herald. Above is the spade, signifying here the phallus, and below is the distaff or instrument of woman's work, meaning the answering member, or yoni. These are united by the snake. We here perceive the meaning of the rhymed chorus sung by Wat Tyler's mob. When Adam delved and Eve spanned part of the work, where was then the barren? Figure 175. Be femme. Gentlemen? Or what, under these ignoble conditions, makes difference or degree? It is supposed that Shakespeare plays upon this truth when he makes his clown in Hamlet observe, "They were the first who ever bore arms." By a reference to the foot of the figure, we shall see what these arms were, and discover male and female resemblances in the shape of the man's escutcheon and the woman's diamond-shaped lozenge. As thus, A is the shield of arms, or spade, or spada, or male implement, on man's own side, or dexter side. 6 is the lozenge, or distaff, or article representative of woman's work, on her proper side, or the left or sinister side. A chalice is in general the sign of the priestly order. The chalice on the tombstone of a knight, or over the door of a castle, is a sign of the Knights Templars, of whom St. John the Evangelist was the patron saint. The cup was forbidden to the laity, and was only received by the priests, in consequence of the decree of Pope Innocent III, A.D. 1215. It means the SS, or Holy Spirit, to which we have frequently adverted. We have carefully inspected that which has been designated the crux antiquariorum, or the puzzle of antiquaries, namely the famous font, which is of unknown and bewildering antiquity, in the nave of Winchester Cathedral. Milner, in his History of Winchester, has the following superficial notice of this relic. The most distinguished ornaments on the top are doves breathing, intiphiles surmounted with crosses fichi, and on the sides, the doves are again depicted with a salamander, emblematic of fire, in allusion to that passage of St. Matthew, "He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire." All the secrets of Masonry are concealed in the Hebrew or Chaldee language. In the first chapter of the Gospel according to St. John is contained the mythical outline of the Kabbalah in its highest part.
Les anciens astrologues, dit le plus savant les Juifs, n'est pas applicable, ayant consacré à chaque planète une couleur, un animal, un bois, un métal, un fruit, une plante, ils formaient de toutes ces choses une figure ou représentation de l'astre, observant pour cet effet de choisir un instant approprié, un jour heureux, tel que la conjonction, ou tout autre aspect favorable. Par leur cérémonie, ils croyaient pouvoir faire passer dans ces figures ou idoles les influences des êtres supérieurs, n'est pas applicable. C'était ces idoles qu'adoraient les Chaldéens sabéens. Les prêtres égyptiens, indiens, perses, on les croyait lier les dieux à leurs idoles, les faire descendre du ciel à leur gré. Ils menacent le soleil et la lune de révéler les secrets des mystères. Eusebius Iamblichus, de Mysterius Egyptiarum.
The mystic emblems of the religions of India, China, Greece, and Rome are closely similar, and are set forth in the ornaments on the friezes of the temples of all those countries, explaining their general principles. Your popular societies are an emanation from the lodges of the Freemasons, in like manner as these proceeded from the funeral pile of the Templars. Thus, the egg and tongue molding, the griffin, the lion of St. Mark, the honeysuckle and lotus ornament, the convolutions and volutes, the horns as floriations springing from the lighted candelabra, the lotus and torii of Egypt, and the Greek ornaments and Roman Templar ornaments are all related in their religious meanings. The names of the three kings, or shepherds, who describe the star of Annunciation in the east are Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. Caspar, or Gaspar, is the white one. Melchior is the king of light. Balthazar, the lord of treasures. Balthazar or Balthazar is the Septuagint spelling of Belshazzar. Linga is the old name of an island near Iona, called the Dutchman's Cap. Gallus, or the cock, is sacred to Mars, whose color is red. In this connection, and as bespeaking Hermes or Mercurius, the messenger of the dawn, may have arisen the use of the cock, as the emblem supposedly of the first descrier of the daily light from the tops of the steeples. It probably signifies the phallic myth. The grasshopper, dragon, arrow, and fox as weathercocks have undoubtedly a remote reference to the same idea of symbolizing the prince of the powers of the air. The form of the pointed arch reached the Orientals, as we see in their temples, in the shape of the fry, geon, and median bonnet. In these strange curves, we have mingling the scarab, scorpion, sigmar, cock's crow at day dawn. Weathercocks turn to the wind and invite the meteoric or elementary influences, the powers of the air. The question as to the mystic side of all this is very interesting and curious.
The fields of the air were supposed by the Rosicrucians to be filled with spirits. Tous les lamas portent la mitre, ou bonnet conique, qui était l'emblème du soleil. Le Dalai Lama, ou immense prêtre de l'art, est ce que nos vieilles relations appelaient le prêtre Jean par l'abus du mot persan Jehan, qui veut dire le monde. Ainsi, le prêtre monde, le dieu monde, se tient parfaitement.
Volney, Ruin, p. 251. In the old Norman French, maître is frequently met for maître. This prester or prêtre Jean is probably no other than the priest or high priest John, otherwise Saint John or the Saint-Esprit. The recognition of the plus in the great Lama, alama, ama, anima, alma, el homme, and si, meaning white, is very curious. The antiquary Bryant is positively of opinion from the very names of Columbkill and Iona that this island Iona was anciently sacred to the archite divinities. The great asylum of the northern Druids was the island of Hu or Iona versus Colan or Columba. The glories around sacred persons and objects, which have straight darting and curvilinear or wavy or serpentine rays alternately, are continual in theological or heraldic illustration, which waved and straight rays alternately imply a deep mystery. They are constant symbols in the sacred nimbi, and are found upon sacramental cups. They are set as the symbolical radii around reliquaries, and they appear as the mystic fiery circle of the pyx. The straight spires and the brandish waved flames, or cherubic, or rather, seraphic, gladii, or crooked swords guarding paradise, imply two of the chief Christian mysteries. In the curved spires of flame, alternating with the aureole or ring of glory, there is possibly a remote hint of H, or the reconciler of the worlds visible and invisible, or SS, to account for the universal deification of horns in architecture all over the world, as its symbolic keynote, as it were, which sigma has been transmitted into modern emblematic science, and incorporated unconsciously into the ornaments and elevated into the high places, over and over again, even in Christian buildings. An old Talmudist Simeon ben, Ioche by name, hazards the startling conjecture that this adoration arose originally in the supernatural light of knowledge of the old day. For the following reasons, the strange explanation which this mysterious writer gives is that the bovine animals would have themselves become men in their future generations, but for that divine arrest which interfered athwart, as it were, and wasted the ruminative, magnetic force, which otherwise miraculously would have effected the transformation. By urging the powers of the brain from the radix of the rudimentary Templar region into the enormous branching, tree-like, then improvised appendages, where this possibility or extension of the nervous lines became spoiled and attenuate, solidified and degraded. Growth and development are assumed as taken from expansion and radiation off a nervous sensitive center, by election or affinity governed by an invisible power operating from without. It is to descend very deep into Kabbalistic and Talmudical mysteries to gain comprehension of an idea concerning the origin of this absurd worship of animal horns. The Kabbalist Simeon ben Ioche declares that it was in gratitude for this changed intention, and because the creature man became man, and not the bovine creatures, a catastrophe which might have happened, except for this diversion of the brain power into horns, that the Egyptians set up the very horns to worship as the real thing, the depository, or ark, into which the supernatural rescue was committed. Thus the horns of the animal, as the idol standing for the means, equally as another representative figure, expressive of the mighty means to which man's existence, and Fig. 176. The Templar banner, Beauzient. Multiplication was entrusted, were exalted for adoration, and placed as the trophies heroically won even out of the reluctance and hostility of nature, and adored, not for themselves, but for that of which they spoke. Fig. 182nd. St. John, digitized by Google. Figure 178. Shakespeare has several covert allusions to the dignity of the myth of the horns. There is much more, probably, in these spoils of the chase, the branching horns or the antlers, than is usually supposed. They indicate infinitely greater things than when they are only seen placed aloft as sylvan trophies. The crest of His late Royal Highness Prince Albert displays the runic horns, or the horns of the northern mythic hero. They were always a mark of princely and of conquering eminence, and they are frequently observable in the crests and blazon of the soldier chiefs, the princes of Germany. They come from the original, Tot, Tat, Thoth, Tut, whence Teuton and Teutonic. These names derive from the mystic Mercurius Trismegistus, thrice master, thrice mistress, for this personage is double sexed. Phoebe above, Diana on earth, Hecate below. Fig. 177, ante from the arches of the Temple Church, figure 184. London is a symbol of the Blessed Virgin. It is also the Delphic E, or Seleucidan anchor. The horns of the Talmud account for the mythological Minotaur, the Bucentaur, Pan, and Priapus, the Sagittary or Centaur, the sign Sagittarius, and perhaps all bicorporate human and animal forms. 189, 190, figure 188, Ionic Greek, egg and tongue molding, figure 189, Grecian molding expressing religious mysteries, Corinthian Temple of Vesta, central flower, probably the Egyptian lotus, fig 190, in the group of figures below, showing the various classical forms of the volutes, or flourished horns, in the figure 199, Greek, Corinthian. Volutes from the Temple of Ellora, in India and other Indian and Persian temples placed under for comparison in the illustration. Fig. 201. Canterbury Cathedral, volutes of the Corinthian form. Figure 200. Norman capital, foliated ornament, resembling the honeysuckle and lotus. Various moldings, both Gothic and classic, present shapes drawn from the astronomical sign Aquarius. These signs, or ciphers, are significant of the sea and of the moon. Glyphs resembling fishes mean Iona or Jonah. They are also symbols of the Savior when they occur amidst the relics left by the early Christians and in forms of the first Christian centuries. The following part of our book we supply, in a series of figures, the succession of changes to vertical arch, early Norman. Chapter the 28th, Rosicrucianism in strange symbols, which the most ancient head covering, in itself a significant hieroglyph, the Phrygian cap, the classic Mithraic cap, the sacrificial cap, or bonnet conique, all deducing from a common symbolical ancestor, became subject. The Mithraic or Phrygian cap is the origin of the priestly mitre in all faiths. It was worn by the priest in sacrifice. When worn by a male, it had its crest, comb, or point set jutting forward. When worn by a female, it bore the same prominent part of the cap in reverse, or on the nape of the neck, as in the instance of the Amazon's helmet, displayed in all old sculptures, or that of Pallas Athene, as exhibited in the figures of Minerva. The peak, pick, or point of caps or hats all refer to the same idea. This point had a sanctifying meaning afterwards attributed to it when it was called the Christa or crest, which signifies a triumphal top or tuft. The grenadier cap and the loose black hussar cap derive remotely from the same sacred Mithraic or emblematical bonnet or high pyramidal cap. It, in this instance, changes to black, because it is devoted to the illustration of the fire workers, who, among modern military, succeed the Vulcanists, Cyclopes, classic smiths, or servants of Vulcan, or Mulciber, the artful worker among the metals and the fire, or amidst the forces of nature. This idea will be found by a reference to the high cap among the Persians, or fire worshippers, and to the black cap among the Bohemians and in the East. All travelers in Eastern lands will remember that the tops of the minarets reminded them of the high-pointed black caps of the Persians. The Phrygian cap is a most recondite antiquarian form. The symbol comes from the highest antiquity. It is displayed on the head of the figure sacrificing in the celebrated sculpture, called the Mithraic sacrifice, in the British Museum. This loose cap, with the point protruded, gives the original form from which all helmets or defensive headpieces, whether Greek or barbarian, deduce. As a Phrygian cap or symbolizing cap, it is always sanguine in its color. It then stands as the cap of liberty, a revolutionary form. Also, in another way, it is even a civic or incorporated badge. It is always masculine in its meaning. It marks the needle of the obelisk, the crown or tip of the phallus, whether human or representative. It has its origin in the rite of circumcision, unaccountable as are both the symbol and the rite. The real meaning of the bonnet de rouge, or cap of liberty, has been involved from time immemorial in deep obscurity, notwithstanding that it has always been regarded as a most important hieroglyph or figure. It signifies the supernatural simultaneous sacrifice and triumph. It has descended from the time of Abraham, and it is supposed to emblem the strange mythic rite of the circumcisio praepiti. The loose Phrygian bonnet conique, or cap of liberty, may be accepted as figuring or standing for that detached integument or husk, separated from a certain point or knob, which has various names in different languages, and which supplies the central idea of this sacrificial rite, the spoil or refuse of which is borne aloft at once as a trophy and as the cap of liberty. It is now a magic sign, and becomes a talisman of supposedly inexpressible power. From what particular dark reason it would be difficult to say. The whole is a sign of initiation, and of baptism of a peculiar kind. The Phrygian cap, ever after this first inauguration, has stood as the sign of the enlightened. The heroic figures in most Gnostic gems, which we give in our illustrations, have caps of this kind. The sacrificer in the sculptured group of the Mithraic sacrifice, among the marbles in the British Museum, has a Phrygian cap on his head, whilst in the act of striking the bull with the poniard, meaning the office of the immolating priest. The bonnet conique is the mitre of the Doge of Venice. Besides the bonnet rouge, the Pope's mitre nez, all mitres or conical head coverings have their name from the terms mithratic or mithraic. The origin of this whole class of names is mitra, or mithra. The cap of the grenadier, the shape of which is alike all over Europe, is related to the Tartar lambskin caps, which are dyed black, and is black also from its association with Vulcan and the fire worshippers. The Scotch Glengarry cap will prove on examination to be only a cocked Phrygian. All the black conical caps, and the meaning of this strange symbol, came from the East. The loose black fur caps derive from the Tartars. The cap of liberty, the crista or crest, and the female helmet all mean the same idea. In the instance of the female crest, the knob is, however, depressed, as shown in the figures below. The forms of grenadier caps, and of those worn by pioneers also, are those of the head covers of the fireworkers or fire raisers of an army. All the black fur caps, militarily called busbies, are Bohemian, Ishmaelitish, heathen, irregular. Their origin lies in the magic East. 207, 208. 210 Fig 208. Figure 210. Few 110 form of the hussars to have had a religious origin. Both the flaps which depend from their bushy fur caps and the loose jacket or dolman which hangs from their left shoulder are mythic. The long triangular flaps, which hang down like a jelly bag, consist in a double slip of cloth which, when necessary, folds round the soldier's face on each side and forms a comfortable nightcap. In our service, one single slip is left to fly. Sir Walter Scott to T. Crofton Croker, July 7, 1827. The hussars wear the original fur cap of Tubal Cain, or the smiths, or artful workers in nature. The name hussar is borrowed from the Oriental exclamation to I Husa, or Al Husa, or Venus, or Aphrodite, D. Figure 219. Digitized by Google, original patroness of these Ishmaelitish irregular light troops, the dolman, or pelisse, properly worn on the left shoulder of the hussar, has its signification and origin in the following act related in Scripture, which refers to a certain Rosicrucian myth. Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward and covered their father Noah. It is astonishing how successfully this mythic act, with its original strange Rosicrucian meaning, should have been hidden away in this apparently little corresponding, trivial fact of the wearing of the hussar loose cloak or pelisse on the left or sinister shoulder, which is the shoulder nearest to the woman, because the Talmudists say that man was made from the left hand. Figure 223. Fur cap of the sword-bearer of the city of London. Fig. 225. Regarding the Templar insignia, we may make the following remarks. The famous flag, or bosient, was their distinguishing symbol.
Bosient, that is to say, in the Gallic tongue, bienséant, because they are fair and honorable to the friends of Christ, but black and terrible to his enemies. Vexillum bipartida. Ex albo e nigro quod nomina boseant, aedi est, Gallica lingua, bienséant, io, quod Christia mesis candidi, sunt et benini, inimicis vera terribiles ad nigri.
The Cardinal de Vitry is totally uninformed as to the meaning and purpose indicated in this mysterious banner. Its black and white was originally derived from the Egyptian sacred black and white, and it conveys the same significant meanings. Now, in the heraldic sense, as we shall soon see, there is no color white. Argent is the silver of the moon's light, the light of the woman, or it is light generally, in opposition to darkness, which is the absence of all color. White is the synthesis and identity of all the colors, in other words, it is light. Thus white is blazoned in the correct heraldic sense, as also in reference to its humid feminine origin, as the melancholy or silver light. Of the moon, argent, also in the higher heraldic grade. Pearl, as signifying tears. Lastly, luna, whose figure or mark is the crescent, or which is either the new moon or the moon of the Moslem. Black is the absence of light and is blazoned. Sable, diamond, without form and void, but cradle of possibilities and being. Taken as synonymous with beginning. It is Sab, or Saturn, whose mark is H, and who is both masculine and feminine. To this divine abstraction, whose face is masked in darkness. Lycos, wolf, like light, whence comes lux, J and V are of Tartar origin. It is probable that St. John's College at Cambridge is the Domus Templi of the round church of the Templars there. The present St. John's is only of modern foundation. There is annexed to, or connected with, this church and almshouse called Bede's House, the name of which has puzzled all the antiquaries. There is little doubt that this was the original Domus Templi, the house of Buddha, corrupted into Bede, and meaning wisdom. a discourse concerning the Tartars, proving that they are the Israelites, or 10 tribes, which, being taken captive by Salmaneser, were transplanted into Media. By Giles Fletcher, doctor of both laws, and sometime ambassador from Elizabeth, Queen of England, to the Emperor of Russia. This was found in Sir Francis Nethersole's study after his death. Mr. Cavendish, an eminent chemist, had reason to be persuaded that the very water itself consisted solely of inflammable air united to dephlogisticated air. This last conclusion has since been strengthened very much by some subsequent experiments of Dr. Priestley's. 260. The jewel of the Rosicrucians is formed of a transparent red stone, with a red cross on one side and a red rose on the other. Thus, it is a crucified rose. The Rossi or Rosicrucians' ideas concerning this emblematical red cross and red rose probably came from the fable of Adonis, who was the sun, whom we have seen so often crucified, being changed into a red rose by Venus. Rus in Irish signifies tree, knowledge, science, magic, power. This is the Hebrew Aram, hence the Persian Rustan. The ancient Sardica in Lat, 40 degrees 50, is now called Sophia, the ancient Aquinium Buddha, or Buddha. These were, I believe, old names restored. The society bearing the name of the Rosicrucians is closely allied with the Templars. Their emblem is a monogram or jewel, or as malicious and bigoted adversaries would say, their object of adoration is a red rose on a cross. Thus, figure 226, when it can be done, it is surrounded with a glory and placed on a Calvary. This is the Nauruz Natsir, or Rose of Isharan, of Tamul or Sharon, or the water rose, the lily Padma Pema, lotus, crucified for the salvation of men crucified in the heavens at the vernal equinox. It is celebrated at that time by the Persians in what they call their new rose, that is Neros, or Nauruz. The Tudor rose, or rose en soleil, is the Rosicrucian. Red rose crucified with its rays of glory or golden sunbeams, or mythical thorns, issuant from its white, immaculate center point, or lily point, all which have further occult meanings lying hidden in theurgic mysticism. All these are spoken in the famous Round Table of the Prince of Christian Knighthood, King Arthur. His table is now hanging on the wall, dusty and neglected, over the king's seat or bench, in the courthouse on the castle hill of our ancient Winchester. But upon this abstruse subject of the Round Table, we have spoken more fully in another place. See Elias Ashmole. Pope John XIV, about the year 970, issued a bull for the baptizing of bells to cleanse the air of devils, with which it was imagined to be full in the time of storms or of public commotion. To this end, the kettle drums of the Lacedaemonians were also supposed to be used on all extraordinarily harmful occasions. Pagodas are uprights and obelisks, with the same meaning as other steeples, and their angles are set about with bells, which are agitated in the wind and are supposed to exercise the same power of driving off evil spirits. Vesper bells secure spiritual serenity. The bells of the churches are tolled in thunderstorms still, in some parishes in England supposedly to disperse the clouds and to open their rifts for the returning sunshine. Edward I of England was in every way an extraordinary man. There are certain reasons for supposing that he was really initiated in Eastern occult ideas. It is to be remembered that he made the crusade to Palestine. He invited to England Guido della Colonna, the author of the Troy book Tale of Troy, and he also invited Raymond Lully into his kingdom. Raymond Lully is affirmed to have supplied to Edward 6 millions of money to enable him to carry on war against the Turks. The origin of the Rose Nobles is from the Rosicrucians. Number 1. Catherine Wheel Window 12 columns. Query, the 12 signs with the rose disc or lotus in the center. From a Saracenic fountain near the Council House, Jerusalem. This fountain seems to be built of fragments, the proof of which is that this inscribed stone is placed over half the discus. The whole structure, though Oriental or Saracenic, abounds with Gothic or pointed features. Such are the frets, the spandrel work, the hood molding, and see number 3. Query, aquari. The aquari always indicate the lunar element, or the female. The baptisteries dedicated to St. John or to the SS are 8-sided. The baptisteria in Italy follow the same emblematical rule. The sections into which the Order of the Knights of Malta, figure 227, were divided were 8, answering to the 8 points of the cross which was their emblem. The order was composed of 8 nations, whereof the English, which was 1, disappeared at the Reformation. The colors of the monastic knightly orders were the following. The Teutonic Knights wore white, with the 8-pointed black cross. The Knights of Malta wore black, with the 8-pointed white cross. The foregoing obtained their black and white from the Egyptians. The Knights Templars, or Red Cross Knights, wore white, with the 8-pointed Buddhist red cross displayed on their mantles. The guardian of the temple, chapel, was called Custos Capella. Attila, surnamed the Scourge of God, is represented as having worn a teraphim, or head, on his breast, a snaky-haired head, which purported to be that of Nimrod, whom he claimed as his great progenitor. This same Medusa-like head was an object of adoration to the heretical followers of Marcion, and was the palladium set up by Antiochus Epiphanes at Antioch, though it has been called the visage of Charon. This Charon may be dis or the severe, or dark, deity. The human head is a magnet, with a natural electric circle moving in the path of the sun. The sign of this, figure 228, Hindu pagoda at Tanjore. Ring is serpentine and is sigma, each man being considered, as far as his head is concerned, as magnetic. The positive pole of the magnet is the os frontis sinciput o sublime. The negative pole is the occiput. Tonsure of the head is considered as a sacred observance. Hair is barbarous and is the mark and investiture of the beasts. The Kabbalists abstain from wine and marriage. Tonsure means the sun's disk in the east.
Les Arabes, dit Hérodote, lib. Do, se rase la tête en rond et autour des tempes, ainsi que se rase, disent-ils, Bacchus n'est pas applicable. La touffe qui conserve les musulmans est encore prise du soleil, qui chez les Égyptiens était peint au solstice d'hiver, n'ayant plus qu'un cheveu sur la tête. Les étoiles de la déesse de Syrie et de la Diane d'Éphèse, d'où dérive celle des prêtres, portent les 12 animaux du zodiaque, figure 230, chapter houses of York Cathedral and of Salis.
Anagram of Powers in Bury Cathedral. Most of the chapter houses of the cathedrals are 8-sided. In this they imitate the 8-sided or Buddhist cross of the Templars. This is the crown, figure 231. Cap, capital, chapiter, tabernacle, mythic, domus templi, or domus dei. They are miniature, mystical round churches, or tors. The chapter houses, oblong in shape, are imini, of the Mosaical covenant. All the dative of the arch-basilicas are of this figure. The symbol is a parallelogram, or an oblong, when the shape adopted is that of the temples.
Then is the navis, nave, or ship, which is the argot. Les Minois l'adorent dans faux. Langue chinoise n'ayant ni le B ni le D, ce peuple a prononcé faux. Ce que les Indiens et les Perses prononcent beau, bad, ou bad par ou bref faux, au pegu, est devenu fota et fta.
Query, ptha of the Egyptians and the Teutonic Fs in Frigga, Friday. B minus F, PF are interchangeable letters. The Aeolic digamma is the crux of philologists. The ancients pronounced every word which began with a vowel with an aspirate, which had the sound of our W, and was often expressed by SS or U, and also Y. For this, the figure of a double one, or F, was invented, whence the name digamma, which was called Aeolic, because the Aeolians of all the tribes retain the greatest traces of the original language. Thus, the Aeolians wrote or pronounced foivos, fesa, vilia. The Latin language was derived from the Aeolic dialect, and naturally adopted the digamma, which it generally expressed by fifth. These significant mysterious sounds and characters, 5, WB, and F, are reputed to be the key of the lunar, or feminine, apotheosis. The symbol is the keynote, as it were, of all Grecian architecture and art, which is all beauty, refinement, and elegance, with power at the highest. Nails of the Passion. Single cloven Templar ensign, chapter the 29th. Connection between the Templars and Gnosticism. He branched sect of the Gnostics called Basilidians, who were Propereophytes, arose in the 2nd century, deriving their name from Basilides, the chief of the Egyptian Gnostics. They taught that in the beginning there were 7 beings, or eons, of a most excellent nature, in whom we recognize the Kabbalistic 7 spirits before the throne. 2 of these first eons, called Diamis and Sophia, that is, power and wisdom, engendered the angels of the highest order. The name of Abraxas, the deity of the Gnostics, is made up of the numerical letters representing the total 365, the aggregate of days of the solar year. The manifestation of Abraxas rests in his soft Nous, or Christ, the chief of the eons who descended to earth and assumed the form of man, was baptized and crucified in appearance. The Manichaeans, who deny the reality of the crucifixion of the Son of God, and whose tenets concerning the Savior Jesus are peculiar, derive their name from Manes, or Mani, and their doctrine was first disseminated in Persia about the year 270. They speak, mysteriously, of the anima mundi, or Heil. They call this principle a deity, and agree with the Rosicrucians in asserting that it is a power presenting itself at once in reverse to the world and to the heavens, in as far as that, while it is dark to the one, it is light to the other, and contrariwise. The Gnostic hierarchy consisted of an archpriest or patriarch, 12 masters, and 72 leaders or bishops. The Gnostics called matter, or body, evil, and darkness, and seemed uncertain whether, in its operations, it were active or passive. It was believed by these sectaries that there were successive emanations of intelligent beings. These were the eons, producing the various phases in creation. In this way, there arose in time a mighty being, the demiurge, who set to work on the inert matter then existing, and out of it formed the world. The reconcilement, or restoration, is to the Buddhistic pleroma, or fullness of light. It is absorption into annihilation or into victory, oblivious of the vexations of life. Here, in this fullness of light, or independence of all worlds, or of life, according to man's ideas, the Supreme God has his habitation, but it is not nothingness. According to our ideas of nothing, it is so only because it has not anything in it comprehensible. The Alexandrian Gnostics inclined to the opinion that matter was inert, or passive. The Syrian Gnostics, on the contrary, held that it was active. Valentinus came from Alexandria to Rome about AD 140. St. Augustine fell under the Gnostic influence, and retained their beliefs from his 20th to his 29th year, viz., from 374 to 383 AD. Their books have for titles the Mysteries, the chapters or heads, the Gospel, and the Treasure. Refer to Beausobre, Walk, Fusselin, and Hahn. The Gnostics held that Christ's teaching was not fully understood even by his disciples, and therefore he promised to send, in due time, a still greater apostle, the Paraclete, who should effectually separate truth from falsehood. This Paraclete appeared in Mani. The west front of Lichfield Cathedral displays accurately the mythic idea of the union of the male and female principles in the parallel double towers, which are uniform. The claims for the real reading of the Egyptian hieroglyphics are distinct and unhesitating, as put forward by the Egyptologists, who, if industry could have succeeded, certainly would have realized their desire. But it is extremely doubtful whether, after all, they are not very widely astray. The late Sir George Cornewall Lewis, in his History of Ancient Astronomy, has disposed conclusively of the assumed correctness of most of these interpretations. The Egyptologists, the principal of whom are Champollion, Rawlinson, Dean Millman, Sir George Lewis, Professor Wilson, Sir Gardner Wilkinson, Dr. Curiton, Dr. Hinks, M. Oppert, Mr. Fox Talbot, with a large amount of ingenious and very plausible research and conjecture, have not truly touched or appreciated these enigmas. They yet remain, baffling the curiosity of the moderns, and they are likely to preserve their real mysteries unread as long as the stones of the pyramids and the remembrance of the Sphinx, if not her visible figure, themselves endure. We believe that there is no adequate mystical comprehension among modern decipherers to read the hopeless secrets purposely evading discovery, which lie locked in the hieroglyphics. The most successful readings are probably guesses only, founded on readily accepted likeness and likeliness. The Temple Church, London, presents many mythic figures which have a Rosicrucian expression. In the spandrels of the arches of the Long Church, besides the Baucian, which is repeated in many places, there are the armorial figures following: Argent on a cross gules, the Agnus Dei, or Paschal Lamb, or gules the Agnus Dei, displaying over the right shoulder the standard of the temple, or a banner, triple cloven, bearing a cross gules, azure, a cross prolonged, potent issuant out of the crescent moon argent, horns upwards, on either side of the cross, a star, or. This latter figure signifies the Virgin Mary, and displays the cross as rising like the pole, or mast of a ship, out of the midst of the crescent moon, or navis biprora, curved at both ends, azure, semia vestoiles, or. The staff of the Grand Master of the Templars displayed a curved cross of 4 splays, or blades, red upon white. The 8-pointed red Buddhist cross was also one of the Templar ensigns. The temple arches abound with brandished estoiles, or stars with wavy or crooked flames. The altar at the east end of the temple church has a cross fleury, with lower limb prolonged, or, on a field of estoiles, wavy. To the right is the Decalogue, surmounted by the initials A.N. On the left are the monograms of the Savior, ICXC. Beneath is the Lord's Prayer. The whole altar displays feminine colors and emblems, the temple church being dedicated to the Virgin Maria. The winged horse, or Pegasus, argent in a field gules, is a badge of the Templars. The tombs of the Templars, disposed around the circular church in London, are of that early Norman shape called Dostan. Their tops are triangular. The ridge molding passes through the temples and out of the mouth of a mask at the upper end, and issues out of the horned skull, apparently, of some purposely trodden creature. The head at the top is shown in the honor point of the cover of the tomb. There is an amount of unsuspected meaning in every curve of these Templar tombs, but it would at present too much occupy us to more fully explain. The crook part of a bishop's staff shows the undulating curve of the SS issuing out of the foliations, meaning the Blessed Virgin Mary. This is particularly observable in the statue of William of Wykeham, the founder, at St. Mary's College, Winchester, who, holding the spiritual crook in the left hand, gives the usual benediction of the 2 extended fingers with his right. The crook is the shepherd crook of the second person and of the Holy Spirit. We now give a series of Gnostic talismans from originals. The reader is requested to refer to our numerous figures and symbols from the Temple Church, London, and to the insignia of the Templars, as displayed in all countries, for hints as to their connection with the mysterious beliefs constituting that which is called Gnosticism. Concerning the pillars of Seth, Josephus asserts that no, I was existent in his time. It is a Kabbah, Figure 235. Wizard's foot, pentalpha. Listic tradition that number 2 was destroyed in the deluge. Notice also their resemblance to the phallus or phallos, lingam or lingam. Lithoi equal to L-thoi. Lucifer, the day star, morning star. Lucifera, an epithet of Diana. Figs. 239, 240 represent under different aspects the armed Abraxas, the chief deity of the Gnostics, in figure 249. Figure 240 represent in figure 238. He is displayed with characteristics of Apollo, or the sun rising in the east, in the quadriga, or four-horse chariot. Figure 240, Abraxas brandishing his whip, as if chasing away the evil genii. On his shield the titles IY. Iek, neatwork, green jasper, the Euron, or winged solar disk, or egg from which issue, on reverse sides, the 2 emblematical asps, has. Figure 239. Fig. Certain characteristics which ally it with the scarabaeus. Both Euron and scarabaeus are symbols continual on the fronts of the Egyptian temples, and they are principally placed over the portals. They are talismans or charms. Figure 248, Osiris, or the Old Man, a terminal figure. At the foot, the celestial globe and Masonic pentagon, or Solomon's seal. The field is occupied by symbols and letters, seemingly Hebrew. The whole design is medieval, hardly a production of even the lowest times of the empire. This is one of the pieces most evidently bespeaking a Rosicrucian origin. Deeply cut in a coarse-grained green jasper, figure 243. Egyptian apis, or golden calf, figure 249, Anubis walking, in each hand a long Egyptian scepter terminating in a ball, in the field the sun and moon, adjuncts marking the astrological character of this talisman, which therefore must be ascribed to the class of. Figure 244, Cancer grasping with one claw at the lunar crescent Gnostic gem. Figure 246, Urion, Abraxoids, the whole enclosed in a sunken circle. Reverend Mixaha between 4 stars. The Kabbalists make Michael the angel of the sun. Plasma of bad quality. Figure 250, this object is the Chnupus serpent, to which frequent reference has been made in our book. The serpent is raising itself in act to give the mythic dart. On its head is the crown of 7 points or vowels. The second amulet presents the name of the Gnostic Un. Figure 248. Known angel, with the 4 stars in the angles. This is Michael, or the Savior, the chief of the eons, 72 in number, and composed of 6 times 12, there being 3 double decades, for the night and 4. AI. Figure 249. Figure 250. The day in each lunar period or sign of the zodiac, each of which consists of 30 degrees. In another aspect, this symbol stands for the Gnostic chief deity Abraxas, the letters of whose name make up the number of days of the solar circle. The following group of figures gives some of the significant hieroglyphs from the Egyptian sculptures. Plume, spiritual power. Jackal, priesthood. Tau, fleur-de-lis, crux ansata. Placenta, religious solemnities. Horns, power. Answer, prudence, knowledge. Asp, sovereignty. Hawk, sagacity. The lotus-headed scepter means religious authority. A snake-headed rod or staff signifies military dominion. A snaky rod or scepter is the lituus or auger's divining rod, when it is curved at the lower as well as the upper end. It is said that this was the scepter of Romulus, figure 251. We give in another place the procession of the Logos, or Word, according to the Gnostics. Figure 252. The Good Shepherd bearing upon his shoulders the lost lamb, as he seems to the uninitiated eye, but on close inspection he becomes the double-headed Anubis, having one head human, the other a jackal's, whilst his girdle assumes the form of a serpent, rearing aloft its crested head. In his hand is a long hooked staff. It was perhaps the signet of some chief teacher or apostle among the Gnostics, and its impression one of the tokens, serving for mutual recognition mentioned by Epiphanius, neatly engraved in a beautiful red sard, fashioned to an octagon form. A shape never met in the class of antique gems, though so much affected in medieval art on account of its supposed mystic virtues. Figure 252. One of the Gnostic gems, reputed the most efficacious of amulets, is of red jasper, and presents the Gorgon's head, with the legend below, APHG Popomana Af I Protect Romandares. In India, the great Abad is Buddha, Bauda, Buddha, or Bada. There is a connection suggested here with the Abaddon of the Greeks. In the same way, a relation may be traced with Buddha's spiritual teacher, who was the mythic Pythagoras, the originator of the system of transmigration, afterwards transplanted to Egypt and thence to Greece. Thus in Sanskrit it is Buddhaguros, In Greek it is Pythagoras. In English it is Pythagoras the Whole, Buddha's spiritual teacher. The Christa, or crest, or symbolic knob of the Phrygian cap or median bonnet is found also, in a feminine form, in the same mythic head cover or helmet, for it unites both sexes in its generative idea, being an idol. In the feminine case, as obviously in all the statues of Minerva or Pallas, Athene, and in the representations of the Amazons or woman champions or warriors, everywhere the cap or helmet has the elongated rhomboidal or globed or salient part in reverse, or dependent on the nape of the neck. This is Athene among our array of these phallic caps. The whole is deeply mythic in its origin. The ideas became Greek, and when treated femininely in Greece, the round or display which in the masculine helmet was naturally pointed forward, saliently or exaltedly, became reversed or collapsed when worn as the trophy on a woman's head. On a narrow review of evidence which evades, there is no doubt that these classic helmets with their crests, this Peleus, Phrygian cap, cap of liberty, or the grenadiers or hussars' fur caps or cocked hats, have all a phallic origin. The cardinal's red hat follows the same idea in a different way. It is a chapel, chapter, chapiter, or chapeau, a discus or table, crimson, as the mystic feminine rose, the queen of flowers, is crimson. The word cardinal comes both from cardo and also from caro, it, carne, flesh, the word made flesh. It is probable that these mythological hints and secret expressions as to the magic working of nature were insinuated by the imaginative and ingenious Greeks into dress and personal appointments. In the temples and in Templar furniture, mythological theosophic hints abound, every curve and every figure, every color and every boss and point, being significant among the Grecian contrivers and among those from whom they borrowed, the Egyptians. We may assume that this classic Grecian form of the head cover or helmet of the Athenian goddess Pallas Athene, or Minerva, not only originated the well-known Grecian mode of arranging women's hair at the back, but that this style is also the far-off classic progenitor of its clumsy, inelegant imitation, the modern chignon, which is only an abused copy of the antique. In our deduction of the modern military fur caps, particularly the grenadier caps of all modern armies, as well as those of other branches of the military service from that common great original, into which they can be securely traced, the mythic Phrygian cap when red, the Vulcan's Peleus when black, we prove the transmission of an inextinguishable important hint in religion. The following are some of the most significant talismans. Of the Gnostics, Seioi Oyor, figure 253. By a prize. In figure 255, we have the representation of the Gnostic female power in nature, Venus or Aphrodite, disclosing in the beauty, grace, and splendor of the material creation. On the other, or terrible side of her character, the endowments of Venus, or of the impersonated idea of beauty. Figure 255. Change into the alarming, these are the attributes of the malefic feminine elementary genius born of darkness or matter, whose tremendous countenance, veiled as in the instance of Isis, or masked as in that of the universal mythological queen of beauty, inspires or destroys according to the angle of contemplation at which she is mythically revealed. Figure 256 is the crested snake, curved as the symbol of the dragon's tail, traversing from left to right the fields of creation in which the stars are scattered as. Figure 256. Figure 257. Estoidos, or waved serpentining flames, the mystic brood of the great dragon. The reverse of this amulet presents the crescent and decrescent moons, placed back to back with a trace or line, implying that the microcosmos, or man, is made as between. Figure 258. The moons. This figure suggests a likeness to the sign of the twins and to that of the February fishes. Figure 257 is the mythological Medusa's head, terrible in her beauty, which transforms the beholder to stone. This direful head is twined around with snakes for hair, and the radii which dart from it are lightning. It is, nevertheless, esteemed one of the most powerful talismans in the Gnostic preservative group, though it expresses nothing but dismay and destruction. Figure 258 is referred to in a previous part of our book as Figure 313. Note, had man preserved his original innocence and refused to taste of the means of that bitter and condemned knowledge of good and evil, as then there would have been none of that physical deficiency asserted to be debited to women, would there likewise have been no females engendered, no propagation of the human species? By some, the preference of the robust to the delicate sex is accounted beyond all question as self-evident. A certain class of philosophers have made no scruple to call a woman an imperfect and even monstrous animal. These have affirmed that nature in generation always intends a male, and that it is only from mistake or deficiency, either of the matter or the faculty, that a woman is produced. The Oriental ethics have degraded woman to the level of a chattel. It is Christianity alone, in the discovery of the divine Mary Virgin Mother, Mother Virgin, that has elevated woman and found for her a possible place in heaven, or in that state other than this state, irradiated with the light breathing with the breath of divinity. Almericus, a doctor at Paris in the 12th century, advances an opinion that, had the state of innocence continued, every individual of our species would have come into existence a complete man, and that God would have created them by himself as he created Adam. He theorizes that woman is a defective animal, and that the generation of her is purely fortuitous and foreign from nature's intent. He therefore infers that there would have been no women in a state of innocence. On the other hand, there exists a counterbalancing singular idea, combated by St. Austin in his City of God, Book 25, Chapter 7, and of which its partisans take upon themselves to say that at the universal resurrection, this imperfect work will be rendered perfect by a change of sex, all the women becoming men, grace and finished being then to complete the work of the human form, which nature only, as it were, had left coarse, unfinished, rough-hewn. These ideas resemble closely the conclusions of the alchemists, who declare that nature, in the production of metals, always intends the generation of gold, and that it is only from accidental diversion, or interposing difficulty, or from the deficiency of the virtue or faculty, that the working out of the aim falls short, and issues, bluntly, and to 66% appointed, in another metal, the blanker, blacker, and coarser metals being in fact only as the diseases of matter which aims at clear, perfect health, or as gold. Here, the alchemists contend that their superhuman science, felicitously applied, completes the operation, and transmutes or compels on into gold what weaker-handed nature was compelled to forego as iron. Thus nature always intends the production of male, but that in the production of female, nature's operation miscarries, the effort degenerates into struggle, and struggle submits in failure. Therefore, female. But this shortcoming, when the divine perfecting means is applied, will be rectified, and in the universal resurrection, women will transcend into the nobler creature, and changing sex or ceasing sex will become womaned men. Both sexes interchanging sex to form the angel, or rather blending sex and uniting sex, by corporate no longer, but becoming ideal, fit spirit populace, winnowed of materiality and of humanity. Unintelligible to the intellect as music, but beautiful to the heart as music. Yet it must be understood that no man's dreams are wholly and altogether evil and vain, for that cannot be, except men were utter devils, which also cannot be so long as we live in the human nature, for man's fall was not like the fall of the evil angels, for these latter fell into the dark abyss, or original wrathful principle. But, on the contrary, men fell and were saved thereby, that is, into nature and creature, which is man's inexpressible happiness, as not being left destitute of hope, or the regenerating seed of the woman. For there does centrally dwell in the human nature that which the wise man calls the voice of wisdom, or conscience recal, which in the suggestion of the immortal sorrow planted deep in the soul of man for his lost paradise. And this immortal sorrow languishes to redemption in repentance. Thus, the pathetic languishment of the Savior, Jesus Christ, my soul is sad even unto death. Hence the garden of agony. 66. This is the genius optimus, the soul of the soul, and the eye of the mind, that part incapable of damnation even in the greatest sinner. This is the last supernatural power which can and will defend man from all the assaults of evil angels, and unto this holy principle and benevolent upspring the dictates and the efforts of all good angels and spirits do tend, it being a great part of their work and business to assist man, and to defend and preserve him from the inward incursions of the multitude of the malignant spirits in their various degrees. Trithemius, a noted Rosicrucian, asserts that never any good angel appeared in the shape of a woman. Van Helmont, in the 93rd chapter of one of his books, has these words, "If an angel appear bearded, let him be accounted an evil one, for a good angel hath never appeared with a beard. The truth is, a woman is the weaker vessel, and was first in the transgression. Therefore that sex is an emblem of weakness and a means of seduction, and therefore there is no reason why the good angels, amongst whom there is no difference of sex, should elect to appear as a female, but rather, being a species of creature above humankind, they assume the shape of the most excellent of that kind, and for the same reason they may appear without beards, both because hair is an excrement, and verges greatly, in the more conspicuous instances, to the brutish nature, as also more especially in their beardless, beautiful, glorified aspects and graceful delicacy and yet power of form, to express their perpetual virgin youth, unspoiled heavenly beauty, and immortal star, born vigor. Hair being an abhorred, tentacled, reaching out, or brute-like animal superflux, the stigma or disgrace of the glorious spark of light or nearly suffocated human entity, condemned to its earth, birth, investiture, or body, It can have nothing about the parts of the deified idea of man, the various classes of the blessed angels. The contrary of all this is to be assumed of the evil genii, or the recusant genii, except in regard to their power or knowledge. For the soul of the world and matter, and to an important one half, the means of the world, are feminine. For night is feminine, thus Bohmen and Plato, as representing all the closest of thought of the centuries. Or, all the above is the reproduction of the singular ideas of the idealists of the Middle Ages. Digitized by Google. Chapter the 30th. Rosicrucian origin of the Order of the Garter, he natural horns of the bull, or the cow, both which animals were deified by the Egyptians and also by the Indians, who particularly elected the cow as the object of religious honor. Were models from which originally all the volves and volutes presenting the figure of curved horns or the significant suggestion of the thin horns of the crescent or growing moon were obtained. The representative horns figured largely afterwards in all architecture and were copied as an important symbol expressive of the second operative power of nature. The Egyptian volutes to the pillars, the Egyptian horns everywhere apparent, the innumerable spiral radii, distinct in all directions, or modified, or interpenetrating the ornamentation of buildings in the east, the Ionic volutes, the Corinthian volutes, which became preeminently pictorial and floral in their treatment in this beautiful order, particularly in the Greek examples, which are, however, very few, the more masculine volves and volutes or horns of the Roman solid majestic columns, the capitals to the ruder and more grotesque of the Indian temples, the fantastic scrolls and crooks and oval curves abounding on the tops of the spiring columns in the Gothic, or more properly to call it, the Romantic architecture called pointed, all have a common ancestor in the horns of the bull, calf, or cow. All these horns are everywhere devoted in their signification to the moon. It is in connection with this secondary god or goddess, who is always recognizable through the peculiar appendage of horns. It is in proximity to this god or goddess, who takes the second place in the general pantheon, the sun taking the first. It is here, in all the illustrations which the mythic theology borrows from architecture, or the science of expressing religious ideas through hieroglyphical forms, that the incoherent horns reiterate, always presenting themselves to recognition, in some form or other, at terminal or at salient points. Thus they become a most important figure, if not the most important figure, in the Templar architecture everywhere, of India, of Egypt, of Greece, of Rome, even of the Christian periods, all the Christian ages, earlier and later. The figure called Nahustan, the mysterious upright set up by Moses in the wilderness, was a talisman in the form of a serpent coiled around the mystic Tau. This is a palladium offered for worship, as we have explained in several places. In a previous part of our book, we have brought forward certain reasons for supposing that the origin of the most noble order of the Garter was very different from that usually and popularly assigned. The occurrence which gave rise to the formation of the order, and which explains the adoption of the motto, does not admit of being told except in far-off roundabout terms. Propriety otherwise would be infringed. We may say no more than that it was a feminine accident, of not quite the character commonly accepted, and not quite so simple and ordinary as letting fall a garter. But this accident which brought about the foundation of the exalted order, however clear it becomes when understood, and however sublime, as the Rosicrucians asserted it was, when it is apprehended in its physiological and also in its deeply mythic sense, could not of necessity be placed before the world, because ordinary persons could not have appreciated it, nor would they have felt any other idea than repulsion and disbelief at the statement. The commonplace, coarse, unprepared mind instantly associates indecency with any explanation, however conclusive, which cannot for obvious reasons be spoken on the housetops. We are now ourselves, against our desire, compelled to speak circuitously about the real, successfully concealed, very strange origin in our modern ideas of this famous Order of the Garter. The subject is, however, of very great consequence, because there is either meaning of the highest force in this, which may be called the Brotherhood of Princes, as the order undoubtedly is in a high sense, or there is no particular meaning, and certainly nothing challenging startled attention. There is either truth in the abstract, occult matters which the order supposedly is formed to whisper and to maintain, or there is only empty, meaningless pretense and affectation. There is grandeur and reality in its formalities, or the whole institution is no more than a parade of things that have no solidity, and an assumption of oaths and obligations that regard nothing of consequence, nothing of real, vital seriousness. We seek thus to ennoble the order in idea, by giving it conclusively the sanction of religion, and rendering to it the respect due to the mighty mystery which may be suspected to lie in it, which it was supposed to emphasize. Whatever it beheld, we are inclined to view with surprise, although in no grudging, prejudiced spirit. The obtrusion of the crescent and star, the symbol of the Grand Signior Soldan or Sultan of Turkey, the representative of Muhammad, the denier of Christ, plus according to his supposed religious now. Preeminently Rosicrucian in its hidden meanings. Plus, it is certainly an anomaly to admit the denier of Christ in an order intended to exalt into vital distinct recognition the divinity of Christ as obligations. We are disposed to contemplate the addition of the Moslem banner, the direct contradiction and neutralizer of the ensigns of the Christian knights, suspended in the chapel of the order, the chapel of St. George at Windsor, as a perplexing, uncomfortable intrusion according to assumed correct Christian ideas. We fear that the admission of this heathen knight may possibly imply heraldically the infraction of the original constitutions of the order, which created it as exclusively Christian. The Garter is specially devoted to the Virgin Mary and to the honor of the Savior of mankind. The Knights Companions are accepted, supposedly, as the special initiated holy guard of the Christian mysteries, and they are viewed as a sworn body of brothers by day and night. From their first association, bound to maintain and uphold, in life and in death, the faith that had Bethlehem for its beginning and Calvary for its end. The bond and mark of this brotherhood is the red cross of crucifixion, the red cross which is the cross of the Rosicrucians, thence their name. Even the badge and star and symbol of this most Christian order, if ever there were a Christian order, which presents this red or sanguine cross of the Redeemer, imaged in the cognizance of his champion, or captain, or chief soldier, St. George or St. Michael, the trampler of the dragon, and custos of the keys of the bottomless pit, where the devils are confined. Protests against the mingling of this Mussulman banner with the Red Cross, which opposed it in the hands of the Crusaders and in those of all Christian knights. Now, all the Christian Garter badges only seem to appeal and to protest quietly and under allowance, with bated breath, as it were, deficient in firmness and life, leaving results to chance and abandoning expostulation to be regarded or disregarded according to circumstances. The Savior of mankind. How can the Sultan of Turkey, or any Mahometan or any disbeliever, discharge the oaths which he is solemnly assumed to take in this respect? 285. These are matters, however, which properly appertain to the office, and lie in the hands of the dignitaries of the Order of the Garter. These officials are its prelate and Garter himself, who are supposed, because of the sublime duties with which they are charged, to be the guardians of the meanings and the myths of an order of knighthood whose heraldic display in one form or other covers the land and must be interpreted either as talisman or toy. In these days without faith, wherein science has extinguished the lights of enthusiasm, leaving even our altars dark, desecrated, and cold, and has eliminated all possible wonder from the earth as miracle from religion, and magic from the sensible or insensible fields of creation, in these questioning, doubting, dense, incredulous days, it is no inconsistency that the gorgeous emblazonments of the Garter should provoke no more curiosity or religious respect than peculiar ornaments do, signifying anything or nothing. But to return to the import of the title of the Order of the Garter. This is a point very engrossing to heralds, antiquaries, and all persons who are interested in the history, traditions, and archaeology of our country. The origin of the order would be trivial, ridiculous, and unbelievable if it be only thought due to the picking up of a lady's garter. It is impossible that the great name and fame of this garter could have arisen alone from this circumstance. The Garter, on the contrary, is traceable from the times of King Arthur, to whose fame throughout Europe as the mythic hero there was no limit in his own period. This we shall soon show conclusively from the accounts of the Garter by Elias Ashmole, who was Garter King of Arms, and who was one of its most painstaking and enlightened historians, besides himself being a faithful and conscientious expositor. An adherent of the Hermetic Rosicrucian science. Round Table of King Arthur, the mirror of chivalry, supplies the model of all the miniature tables or tablets which bear the contrasted roses, red and white as they were originally, with the noble vaunt, or motto, round them, evil to him, or the same to him, who thinks ill of these natural feminine circumstances, the character of which our readers will by this time not fail to recognize. The glory of woman and the punishment of woman after the fall, as indicated in Genesis, go hand in hand. It was in honor of woman, and to raise into dignity the expression of the condemned means, which is her mark and betrayal, but which produced the world in producing man, and which saved the world in the person of the Redeemer, born of woman. It is to glorify typically and mystically this fleshly vehicle, that the Order of the Garter, or Garter, that keeps it sacred was instituted. The Knights of the Garter stand sentinel, in fact, over woman's shame, at the same time that they proclaim her glory, in the pardoned sense. These strange ideas are strictly those of the old Rosicrucians, or Brethren of the Red Cross, and we only reproduce them. The early writers saw no indecency in speaking openly of these things, which are usually hidden away, as improper to be spoken about. The blackness or darkness of matter, or of the mother of nature, is figured in another respect in the belongings of this famous feminine order, instituted for the glory of woman. Curious armorists, skilled in the knowledge of the deep sacred symbolism with which the old heralds suffused their illustrations or emblazonments, will remember that black is a feature in the Order of the Garter, and that, among figures and glyphs and hints the most profound, the Black Book containing the original constitutions of the order, from which Black Book comes the important. Black Rod was lost or taken away for some secret reason before the time of Henry V. See pp. 157,159, ante, for previous remarks about the Garter. Elias Ashmole mentions the order in the following terms: "We may ascend a step higher, and if we may give credit to Harding, it is recorded that King Arthur paid St. George, whose red cross is the badge of the Garter, the most particular honors, for he advanced his effigy in one of his banners, which was about 200 years after his martyrdom, and very early for a country so remote from Cappadocia to have him in reverence and esteem. In regard to the story of the Countess of Salisbury and her Garter, we shall insert the judgment of Dr. Heylin, who took great pains to ascertain its foundation. This I take to be a vain and idle romance," he says, derogatory both to the founder and the order, first published by Polydore Virgil, a stranger to the affairs of England, and by him taken upon no better ground than fama vulgi, the tradition of the common people, too trifling a foundation upon which to raise so great a building. The material whereof the Garter was composed at first is an arcanum, nor is it described by any writer before Polydore Virgil, and he only speaks of it in general terms. The Garter was originally without a motto. As to the appointments of the order, we may gain the most authentic idea of them from the effigies of some of the first knights. Sir William Fitzwarren was buried on the north side of the chancel of the church of Wantage, in Berkshire, in the 35th year of the reign of King Edward III. Sir Richard Pembridge, who was a knight of the Garter of the time of Edward III, lies on the south side of the Cathedral of Hereford. The monument of Sir Simon Burley, beheaded A.D. 1388, was raised in the north wall near the choir of St. Paul's, London. It is remarkable that Duchesne, a noted French historian, is the source from which we derive the acknowledgement that it was by the special invocation of St. George that King Edward III, a proof that it did not originate with Edward III, gained the Battle of Crecy, which, lying deeply in his remembrance, he founded, continues Duchesne, a chapel within the castle of Windsor, and dedicated it in gratitude to the saint, who is the patron of England. The first example of a garter that occurs is on the before-mentioned monument of Sir Francis Burley, where, on the front, towards the head, are his own arms, impaling his first wife's, set within a garter. This wants the impress or motto. Another shield of arms, having the same impalement placed below the feet, is surrounded with a collar of SS, of the same form with that about his neck. It was appointed by King Henry VIII, and embodied in the statutes of the order, that the collar should be composed of pieces of gold in fashion of garters, the ground enameled blue, and the letters of the motto gold. In the midst of each garter 2 roses were to be placed, the innermost enameled red, and the outermost white. Contrarily, in the next garter, the innermost rose enameled white, and the outermost red. And so alternately, but of later times, these roses are wholly red. The number of these garters is so many as to be the ordained number of the sovereign and knights' companions. At the institution they were 26, being fastened together with as many knots of gold. And this mode hitherto has continued invariable, nor ought the collar to be adorned or enriched with precious stones, such being prohibited by the laws of the order. At what time the collar of SS came into England is not fully determined, but it would seem that it came at least 300 years since. The collar of SS means the Magian, or First Order, or Brotherhood. In the Christian arrangements it stands for the Holy Spirit, or third, person of the Trinity. In the Gnostic talismans it is displayed as the bar curved with the triple S, referred to the Canufis Abraxoids occurring in our book, for we connect the collar of SS with the theology of the Gnostics, that the order of the Garter is feminine, and that its origin is an apotheosis of the rose, and of a certain sin. Gular physiological fact connected with woman's life is proven in many ways, such as the double garters, red and white, the 26 nights representing the double 13 lunations in the year, or their 26 mythic dark and light changes of night and day. But how is all this magic and sacred in the estimate of the Rosicrucians? An inquirer will very naturally ask. The answer to all this is very ample and satisfactory, but particulars must be left to the sagacity of the querist himself, because propriety does not admit of explanation. Suffice it to say that it is one of the most curious and wonderful subjects which has occupied the attention of antiquaries. That archaeological puzzle, the Round Table of King Arthur, is a perfect display of this whole subject of the origin of the garter. It springs directly from it, being the same object as that enclosed by the mythic garter, garter, or girther. King Edward III chose the octave of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin for the inauguration of his order. Andrew Duchesne declares that this new order was announced on New Year's Day, A.D. 1344. There were jousts holden in honor of it on the Monday after the feast of St. Hilary following January 19th. There are variations in the histories as to the real period of the institution of the garter, most historians specifying the year 1349. Ashmole states that a great supper was ordered to inaugurate the solemnity of the institution, and that a festival was to be annually held at Whitsuntide, that King Edward erected a particular building in the castle, and therein placed a table of 200 feet diameter, giving to the building itself the name of the Round Table. He appropriated £100 per week, an enormous sum in those days, for the maintenance of this table. In imitation of this, the French King Philip de Valois instituted a round table for himself at his court. Some say that he had an intention of instituting an order of knighthood upon the same feminine subject, but that he was anticipated by King Edward, which shows that it was something more than an accident and a mere garter which inspired the idea of this rose forming the mystery. The knights were denominated Equitis Auri Pericilides. King Edward III had such veneration for the Blessed Virgin Mary that he ordained that the habit of his Knights of the Garter should be worn on the days of her 5 solemnities. Elias Ashmole states that the original of the statutes of institution had wholly perished long before his time. There was a transcript existing in the reign of Henry V in an old book called Registrum Ordinis Chartisium. Though the order was instituted so long ago as in the year 1344, it was not till the reign of Charles II that the knights were empowered to wear the star they use at present embroidered on their coats. The rays are the glory round the red cross. Sir John Froissart, the only writer of the age that treats of this institution, assigns no such origin as the picking up of the Countess of Salisbury's garter, nor does he adduce the words of the motto of the garter as having been spoken by King Edward III when encountering the laughter of his court, and assuring them that he would make the proudest eventually wear it as the most illustrious badge. There can be only one conclusion as to the character of the investment which was picked up, and which article of dress makes it clear that the Countess of Salisbury, or the lady, whoever she may be, who has succeeded in becoming so wonderfully celebrated in the after ages of chivalry, should have rather been at home and at rest than inattentive to saltatory risks in engaging in a dance or in forgetful gambols at a crowded court. There was no mention of this supposed picking up of a garter for 200 years. Nor was there anything referring to such an origin occurring in any of our historians other than Sir John Froissart, until Polydore Virgil took occasion to say something of it in his notices of the origin of the order. In the original statutes of the order, there is not the least conjecture expressed, nor does the compiler of that tract entitled Institutio Clarissimi Ordinis Militaris a Praenobili Subligaculo non Cupata, preface to the Black Book of the Garter, let fall any passage on which to ground the adroit conclusions about the garter. Polydore does not mention whose garter it was. This he cautiously declines to do. He says that it was either the Queen's or that of the King's mistress, meaning Joan, Countess of Salisbury, with whom it was supposed the King was in love, and whom he relieved when she was bravely holding out for him against the Scots in her castle of Wark upon Tweed. But she was certainly no mistress of the King's, in the injurious and unworthy sense. It is to be particularly noticed that the Latin words subliger, subligaculum, mean not a garter, but breeches, drawers, or trousers. It was therefore not a garter for the leg, but a cincture for the body, which was thus picked up publicly and elevated for honor as such an unexpected illustrious object, one around which the most noble knights were to take enthusiastic oaths of the most devoted religious homage. Now, unless there had been some most extraordinary meaning under all this, such an idolizing of a garter could never have occurred, and the whole occurrence ages ago would have been laughed into oblivion, carrying the sublime honors of the garter with it. Instead of this, the garter is the highest token of greatness the sovereign of England can bestow, and it is contended for and accepted with eager pride by princes. Subligaculum, breeches, drawers, trousers. Subligatus, cinctured, bound, and wearing drawers. The origin of the garter is proven in this word not to be a garter at all. It is most generally supposed that it was on January 19, 1344, that King Edward instituted his famous Order of the Garter. This period, it will be perceived, was almost within an octave of the purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary, under whose patronage and under the guardianship of St. George on earth. This period, it will be perceived, was almost within an octave of the purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary, under whose patronage and under the guardianship of St. George on earth, King Edward placed his profoundly religious order. The whole was a revival of the Round Table of King Arthur, or the apotheosized female discus in certain mythical aspects. To confirm us in our assertion of the feminine origin of the Order of the Garter, which many in their ignorance have questioned, we may state that one of the old chroniclers, though somewhat guardedly, as befitted those great persons of whom he spoke, declares that the lady who let fall her garter, or garter, was the queen, who had suddenly left the courtly assembly in some confusion, and was hastening to her own apartments, followed by the king, who at first did not perceive the reason when the spectators avoided lifting the article, being aware to whom it belonged, but who raised it himself, and called aloud, not the words of the motto of the garter, which the historian says that the queen herself spoke, but giving an intimation that he would, spite of their laughter, make the proudest of the refusers wear the rejected cincture as the grandest badge that knighthood ever bore. Rightly viewed, this little evaded incident, which we desire to restore to its proper place of due respect in the knowledge of Englishmen, is the most conclusive proof of King Edward's nobleness and greatness of heart, and of his chivalrous, inexpressibly gallant delicacy, an instance admirable to all future generations, and worthy of the most enduring applause. The reader, finally, is referred to our observations in a previous part of our book for evidence in our justification. In the foregoing, we give the Rosicrucian view of the origin of the garter. It is the center point round which have converged the noblest ideas and the most illustrious individuals in the world. It is still the proudest and most solemn badge, and the chiefest English knightly dignity. Strangely enough, too, this whole history of the garter teaches as its moral the greatness of the proper independence of shame and the holiness of its unconsciousness. Also the gallantry and the knighthood of the holding sacred these strange natural things.